for being here. For the record, my name is Gabriela Coletta Zapata, District 1 City Councilor, and I'm the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Government Operations. Today is March 25th, 2025, and the time is 11:07 a.m. This hearing is being recorded. It is also being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of this hearing. Individuals will be called on in the order in which they signed up and will have 2 minutes to testify. If you are interested in testifying in person, please add your name to the sign-up sheet near the entrance of the chamber. If you are looking to testify virtually, please email our Central Staff Liaison, Megan Kavanaugh, at meghan.kavanaugh@boston.gov for the link, and your name will be added to the list. Today's hearing is on docket 0337, order for a hearing regarding the transition and operations of the new City Planning Department. This matter was sponsored by Councilors Erin Murphy, John Fitzgerald, and Julia Mejia, and referred to the committee on January 29th, 2025. Today, I am joined by my colleagues in order of arrival, Councilor Flynn, Murphy, Fitzgerald, Durkin, and Brereton. And at this time, I would like to go to the lead sponsors for any opening remarks, and then following that, go to my colleagues for any opening remarks they may have. Before that, I just want to acknowledge that we've been joined today by Chief of Planning, Cairo Shen of the Boston Planning Department, Devin Quirk, Deputy Chief of the Planning Department, and Teresa Polhemus, Executive Director and Secretary of the Boston Planning Department. With that, I will go to Councilor Erin Murphy for any opening remarks you may have.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. Looking forward to the conversation. I filed this hearing order back in January. We had a lot of hearings, as you know, Devin. We were here really working through the transition that went into effect now, like 9 months ago. So a lot of, I think, good questions, a lot of concerns from the current employees who were working under, the former BPDA, and thought it would be important to come back together and check in how things are going. And at the same time, we got a new commissioner, and it was great to meet with you. Thank you. It was good to come upstairs and sit down and talk with you. I appreciated that time. But the reason to, and I'll just highlight what I hope we get out of this hearing, is to review the transition process from the BPDA to the new planning department, discuss how the concerns raised prior to the transition have been addressed, evaluate the department's current operations, achievements, and challenges, discuss the department's strategic plans and initiatives for the future, and welcome Carlos to formally introduce the new Chief of Planning to the City Council. Even though the planning BPDA would always come down to the council if called, it is, I think, a different thing now where you're actually a city department here in the city. You're not just renting space on the 9th floor, you're like part of the city. So looking forward to the conversations, and I know my colleagues, all signed on and also want to just kind of check in. And so looking forward to their questions and our conversation today. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Fitzgerald.
Thank you all for being here. It's very rare when you have all three panelists are your former bosses. So it's great to be on this side of things. I can't promise I'll go so easy over the past 7 years, but no, I don't hold grudges, and I look forward to the hearing. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Councilor Fitzgerald. Councilor Flynn.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I look forward to the hearing. Thank you.
Okay, great. Councilor Durkin.
Thank you so much, Chair Coletta. And it's nice to see the planning department here where I'm not chairing the hearing, because sometimes these conversations get so fraught, and hopefully today is pretty easy, but great to see Chief Shen. I think this is his inaugural in the pit, so congratulations on your new position. And just excited to dig in. I know we work really closely together, and there's a lot going on in District 8, so excited to talk more. And my take is that the transition has gone really well, and that obviously the BRA, BPDA, EDIC still exist. So I think that's really what we're digging into today. And thank you all for your support and all that you do to make sure that our city development process works and that we're centering planning in that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning. Welcome back, Chief Caro Shen. You were here before I come in, so I'm sure you're very familiar with the landscape here in the city. Yes, I just really am looking forward to the conversation, see where we're at and where we need to tweak some things, but look forward to the conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to recognize we've also been given a letter of absence by Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, City Councilor of District 7. I will keep it brief. I just want to say thank you so much for your work. Kairos, Chief, welcome back to the city. I really appreciated our conversation, I think it was a month ago, about all things Plan East Boston, Plan Charlestown, and various other initiatives that are happening across the city and in my district. I'm really grateful. I do want to give a shout out to former Chief Arthur Jemison, who was key in the conversations that we had and the hearings that we had, which was really my baptism by fire as chair of Government Operations Committee, where we reviewed this ordinance, and I'm really grateful for how collaborative the process was. What I feel was a thorough and transparent process to produce a document that ultimately ensures more fiscal transparency and oversight. And I'll just give an overview of it before we dive into your presentation. We were able to get a full financial audit of the BPDA and/or successor entity, accounting of developer mitigation funds, and additional safeguards that aligned with the city charter. We also mandated annual reporting and a city council hearing, which will provide oversight of performance to track land use tools of affordability, resilience, and equity, and mandating an annual city council hearing before any sort of budget review. We also were able to embed an independent assessment and community voice, which empowers the council to partner with a research entity to conduct an assessment for greater accountability and allows additional checkpoints for community voice. And so I feel like we are due. This conversation is necessary, and I want to thank Councilor Murphy, Fitzgerald, and Mejia for pushing this forward, because we do want to figure out, what is going on, how is it going? I have heard from some folks who are EDIC employees that still feel and a level of uncertainty with their benefits and their pensions, so we'd love to get into that. But without further ado, I'll pass it over to Chief of Planning, Kairos Shen, for any opening remarks you may have. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Council and Committee. Thank you for inviting us down this morning for this conversation. I'm delighted to be here this morning. It is the first time that I'm testifying in front of the Council since returning to the city in this position as Chief of Planning. For those of you who do not know, let me just provide a brief introduction. I actually started working in City Hall 31 years ago, first as an urban designer for then the Boston Redevelopment Authority. I was one of the last hires under Mayor Flynn, and then had the pleasure of working within the agency for about 23 years for the entire duration of Mayor Menino's administration. And then I also stayed for an additional year and a half after Mayor Walsh. I would say that even though I've been here, many things feel familiar, but it is a very different place. City Hall is very different. Our city is very different. And while many of you assume that I know my way around the building, I feel like I'm learning every day. And I appreciate this opportunity to share some of the things that I've learned since returning. In the ensuing time from 2015 to my return last year, I spent most of my time teaching. I had the opportunity to be associated with the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. I taught for 4 years at Columbia University, and then most of my teaching did in fact occur at the Center of Real Estate at MIT. which for the last 4 years before returning, I was the executive director and the director of the Masters of Science in Real Estate Development program. I got to learn a lot, not only about real estate per se and planning. I was able to actually learn a lot about what some of the best practices around the world is in both the real estate profession and planning. So I hope that I will be able to impart some of that knowledge and best practices throughout the world back here in Boston. For today, what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit, give an overview about the initiatives that the planning department have been engaged in, and then open up for questions. So I'd like to start by just saying that articulating the mayor's vision and why she actually embarked, and many of you were part of that process. So forgive me if I take a sort of an observer's view on this, which is that what was the vision of actually transforming the Boston Planning and Development Agency to a city planning department. And I think that there were 3 guiding principles. The first is to have planning lead. And in that regard, that the planning activity and development activity in the city should not be market-driven, but be driven by the long-term needs and aspirations of the city and the community. So that's principle number 1. The second principle is to make sure that as a planning department that we are more inclusive. The idea that the Boston Planning Development Agency as an independent agency often gave the aura, and in some of its practices was not open and transparent to the citizens that it served. And the goal of actually having the planning department as an integral part of the city government is to make sure that we are transparent and accountable, but also that we're creating a bigger table with more seats at the table to engage the community and stakeholders in a more effective way. And then finally, the third principle is that in our work that we are much more transparent and predictable and accountable. And the idea that we are here in front of you like today to actually share with you openly about some of the work that we're engaging in and how we're actually processing the work and actually serving the citizens of the city on a daily basis. So those are the 3 principles. There is also, so the question and the job is to operationalize these principles. And as many of you know, the city had been actually working, and the planning and development activity had been concentrated and led by the Boston Redevelopment Authority and then subsequently the Boston Planning and Development Agency. And that culture was in place until last year for almost 70 years. And so part of the job that we're embarking on is to transform and create a new culture around planning and development. So what does this mean to be a Boston City Planning Department? I've already mentioned that it's important for us to be accountable, transparent, and predictable. We cannot rebuild overnight this culture of planning and development that has existed for over 70 years, but with every initiative, we're trying to invite new people into our processes so that the future we plan reflect all of the all the diversity of our citizens and the needs of our city. The ultimate goal is to have a zoning code that is modern, predictable, and enforceable, and one that was created through inclusive planning and our communities so that residents know how their neighborhood will grow. Having a zoning code that is out of date, which is what it is in most of our communities today, does not mean that growth doesn't happen. It means that the city grows through the Zoning Board of Appeal, one project at a time. Without a smart plan and without a true code that is up to date, that would encourage the type of growth the city needs where the city needs it. So one of the most important things that we will be embarking on is actually doing a citywide needs assessment to understand where the city is growing and what its needs will be in the coming years. Now, we're here in front of you today to also touch upon our annual report. And so I'd like to provide just a brief overview. As you will see in the report, the Planning Department's initiatives advances resiliency, affordability, and equity across Boston in different ways. I won't mention every initiative that is in the report in my remarks this morning, but we're happy to discuss any of these in the discussion and questions and answers after my remarks. I would just highlight that the report is organized based on the major functions of the Planning Department. They include planning, zoning, and urban design. It also includes development review, where our Planning Department actually manages the development review process. There is also a section where we cover the real estate activities of the Planning Department. We are still one of the largest stewards of publicly owned land in the city. And then finally, there is the work that our research department engages in developing new urban policies. For all of them, we're working with the community to identify how we can grow in a way that will make our streets safer, expand public spaces, and improve connectivity in our city. Squares and Streets is a great example of our vision of operating as a true planning department. We identified growth near transit and in our neighborhood centers as a way to meet the city's goal and to support local communities. This initiative will make space for new residents, increase the diversity of housing options that we need, support our small businesses that will benefit from more foot traffic, and invest in public spaces and in the arts and culture. We have diversified our engagement methods to bring in new voices through our low-touch methods like surveys to reach more people, through the work of the Planning Advisory Council, which was formed late last year. We're also working to improve transparency and accountability to the public, and also coordinate better with our sister departments within the city. And we would like, through these processes, to demonstrate how the city is making progress in delivering on comprehensive plans and major capital projects. The annual report also shares ways that we are leading in innovation, tackling challenges that cities across the country are also facing in new and creative ways. Our Office to Residential Conversion program now has over 700 units in the pipeline, and on last Wednesday, the mayor also announced how we're expanding this program to reach and impact more of these vacant offices. Our $100 million accelerator fund, approved by this council, represents a unique, innovative way for us to respond to the difficult economic condition in the United States that is impacting housing construction. Now, I will not go into any more detail on the specific initiatives. The annual report is available online, and hopefully many of you have actually been able to review some of the initiatives that is documented there. And with that, I will end my opening statements and open it for questions. However, actually, I have to say, I want to publicly appreciate the Devin Quirk, who is the deputy chief, as well as Teresa Bohemus, who actually were here the last year working very closely with you under the leadership of Chief Jameson. I want to say that on the technicalities of the transition, how we're doing, I will rely on both their able knowledge. I have to say that I wouldn't have been able to get up to speed as quickly as I have without the help of both of them. And thank you very much, Devin, and thank you, Teresa. Anytime that there are difficult questions for the conversation, I will be looking for them to supplement any answers. So hopefully we are prepared for your questions, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. For the public and transparency purposes, where can they find the annual report that's been published?
So I believe that actually it's already posted on our website.
I
Has
don't
it been?
think it is. It's not yet. We're going to post it later.
So actually, my apologies. I guess you are the first to actually have the opportunity to review this document. So we will post it as soon as this hearing is complete.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that because we certainly hadn't seen it as an office, so I was like,
Okay.
how did we miss this? But it sounds like it has not been publicly accessible to anybody. And it hasn't been sent to any counselors, has it?
Yes.
Okay, yesterday? Okay, thank you, everyone.
Out of the presses.
Counselor Fitzgerald, or excuse me, Counselor Murphy, if you'd like to start with your questions, I'll give folks 6 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and I apologize, we've been joined by Counselor Mejia. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. You spoke to the need of being more transparent and felt as though the transition, that was one of the, reasons why the administration said that if we moved over to a city department, that would achieve more accountability and transparency. Could you speak to some concrete examples that have already happened, or in maybe some that you also are working on that you hope to see in the future that would show the public and us here on the council that this is being more transparent for the residents?
So first of all, I believe that one of the most important changes is that the way that our budget is developed is now completely different than the years that I served at the BRA. We will be coming down in front of this council to share and actually talk through our budget. So I think that there's clarity and transparency in the how money is actually, how we spend our money and what we spend it on. And I think that that is something that I think that, again, Devon and Teresa were part of the initial hearing as part of the transition. We're prepared to answer any questions in terms of where our resources are going and how it is directly impacting the initiatives, the planning and development initiatives, as well as other urban policies that we're pursuing. So that's number one. Number two, I know that actually later this afternoon we will have additional staff coming down to share a discussion and knowledge that we have been gathering around these battery storage facilities. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is something new that did not occur regularly. There's also an effort on our part to make sure that there are more briefings with councillors. As you know, I think that many of you, I apologize for those who I have not been able to schedule to actually have one-on-one meetings, but I've been making a point of making sure that I'm available personally to meet individually with councillors. That is a new practice that my understanding did not occur in the past. So in those ways, I think that we're very different. The other thing that occurs within the own management of the city departments, there are regular meetings that we obviously have with the rest of the cabinet chiefs. And I mentioned in my opening remark the Planning Advisory Council, which was a new council that was formed in order for the planning department to more directly coordinate its activities with the other city departments. So all the departments that actually have engaged in activities related to the built environment is part of that advisory council, and that the goal in that is to make sure that we are directing our resources where it's needed, but also not duplicating the activities that other departments are engaging in. Another thing that I know that has happened is that we have reorganized some of the actual activities, especially related to the kind of responsibility between the streets cabinet and the planning department, so that we're trying to be more smart about that, and also be more responsive to citizens' needs and feedback.
Could you speak to some initiatives that were already underway previously, and then as we're now a city department, how it may look different on that issue about like accountability and transparency? I'm thinking of like squares and streets, because that was something that we were already working through. And what is different now that it's a department?
How about this? I think because my perspective is new, and already when I arrived that it's a planning department, I don't want to speak more about sort of like years, decades before when I was first here. Can I suggest that we
Please,
let
yeah.
Devin
Please,
maybe answer some of those questions?
So you're absolutely right, Councillor, that Squares and Streets was an initiative that was started while we were still the Planning and Development Agency. I think what's important about the financial and operational transparency of becoming a city planning department is now you as a council can see where those dollars are going and how much staff resources are putting against this, how much money are we spending on consultants, how does that compare to other efforts within the department and other efforts that are going on within city government, right? The idea of having a quasi-governmental land bank real estate development company control planning for a city was something that really came out of an era of urban renewal in the 1960s. As we talked a lot about, right, that is just not how major American cities do planning. They do planning working within their government apparatus. So I don't think that the transparency and trust is built overnight, but it's built through setting up good structures that will stand the test of time and coming to meetings like this one and talking about how we're performing. I suppose the council could have always asked us to come as an agency, but we weren't required to. We are here as your employees now, reporting to you and answering your questions.
And I'd like to go on the record saying thank you for coming, because we've had hearings, unfortunately, where departments who do work directly for the city don't show up, so I do appreciate you being here. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'll at least get the question on the record. A lot of the concerns that we did discuss were coming directly from employees, and rightfully so. If you could just touch on how you feel that it's gone.
Yeah, I mean, that's been unequivocally the hardest part of this transition is making sure that we do the absolute best by our employees during a moment where all transitions are hard, and in terms of a merger of two corporations is a difficult thing, and making sure that wherever possible we continue the best possible benefits and structures for employees. But Teresa, might you want to jump in on this one? But
Just asking if you can speak into the microphone a little bit more.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. So for I think one of the things that was of most concern for our staff is the benefits that they're offered. We tried very hard to itemize any changes, and our staff took a look at the 42 different benefits that our staff received and clarified for them through a transition of any changes that would occur. So some things are just different, right? The healthcare program that the city offers is different than the GIC program that we previously participated in, but the city offers very, very good health care, and it really just depends on your personal situation, whether that was a benefit to you or a drawback. The number one concern that remains is the change in retirement benefits. So we're actually two different corporations, as you remember, the BRA and the EDIC. BRA employees participate in the city's pension program. EDIC employees were not allowed to participate in the city's pension program and instead received 401A, which is the equivalent for a 401K for government. Many of those employees would have preferred to stay in that 401A, and that was not an option as they moved to the city, because the city only offers a pension program. So that is a transition that has been a difficult one for some of our staff.
How many do you know? How many about employees?
There are 160 employees
that
weren't
able
there
to
are
stay.
EDIC employees that moved to the city. Now, some of them are happy to have the pension program. Some of them know that was not what they wanted, and some of them, the jury's still out. So one a piece of unfinished business is that we, through our home rule petition, asked the state legislature to consider EDIC employees pension eligible for their years of service with the EDIC. This council approved that through our home rule petition. The state House of Representatives approved that. It did not pass the state Senate last year, so we remain advocating for that, and the sooner the better, really, because some of those employees would very much like to buy back 2 or 3 years.
Do you know how much money we're talking? Is
I
it
don't-
hundreds of thousands, or is it a smaller amount?
It's based on what their retirement contribution would have been if they were working for the city at that time, plus some degree of interest. So that's, I think for most employees, it's 11% of their salary. And the further we get away from that moment of transition, the more that interest builds. So there's some urgency to trying to get this done. So we're still remain active, pushing for our home rule petition. We're also looking for other avenues to get that done quickly for our people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Fitzgerald?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you guys know, when this vote was happening, I was very much against the process happening. So my questions will relate as to sort of why I hope I'm right, and I hope that you all could prove me wrong. My number one question is, what can we do now that we were not able to do in the prior iteration of this agency? Now that we went through this whole process of coming into the city, what did that gain us in terms of power, authority, ability to do what that we were not able to do in the previous iteration, which you and I worked, Director Shen?
I don't think that there are things that we have given up some of the powers that are necessary to plan and grow our cities. To the extent that those powers are still accessible and available to the new planning department, my understanding is that they still exist. The difference is how we exercise that power. And as you know, we still have a BPDA board which continues to oversee the exercise of some of those specific powers, but that it is exercised within the context of this oversight that we're actually engaging in at this moment. So I do not believe that that the powers have been made unavailable, but how we access it and how we deploy it is more transparent. So, Devin, would you like to add to that?
I think maybe what's important to dig into, Councillor, is the definition of we and how you frame that question. So there are things that you as a city councillor can now do that you weren't able to do before. You can approve our budget, you can call us and require us to come to this hearing as your employees. The relationship that you have to any other city department is now the one that you have with our department. There are things that we can't do that we, once we're able to, we have to seek your authority and the city's authority to hire staff, to reauthorize expenditures. Those are things that have changed. But they're mostly in the fiscal category, and the fiscal category relates to oversight and accountability, and ultimately with our major goal of building trust with our communities.
So it would be fair to say that there was nothing gained. It is just a change in how we deploy what we currently have.
Look, I think well, first of all, I understood your question relating to the powers and responsibilities that our city had entrusted to a semi-autonomous agency and to the extent that that agency's power and ability to actually impact the built environment, right? Those powers still exist. I just want to be clear, that's different than sort of, let's say, an operational change. And I think that as much as the criticism, some of it well-founded on how the development agency operated in the past and how it operates today, I think is very different. I've already mentioned in my opening statement that returning to or joining a brand new city planning department as a chief of planning, directly accountable and in the employment of the city, is different than what it was like as an employee of the Boston Redevelopment Authority. Now, it may be semantics, but I think that the transparency under which we operate is very different. And I would expect that as we embark on trying to solve some of the difficult problems that the city is confronting, that we will be in front of you to make sure that we answer the questions that all of you will have about when and why we will be exercising our powers. Like in the past, take the example of the accelerator fund, which this body approved. I think the fact that that process occurred in this council chamber, I think is highlighting how differently, I think, Councillor, you would remember probably if that were to occur, let's just say 5-10 years ago, that discussion would probably have happened only at the BPDA board. And then
Director Shah, only because I'm on a time limit.
Okay.
I apologize because I do have more questions. But thank you. And I don't mean to be rude. But I do want to. No.
It's okay.
But so the transparency is the difference.
Yeah. Yes.
But I guess my question is, right, on the day-to-day of if you, as an employee of the BRA, nothing has changed. You are still going about Article 80, planning, the powers that be still exist that from the previous iteration. And besides, in your words, there is a transparency of the way we are operating now, and that was the benefit to coming into the city.
Yes, I think that was a requirement. I've already mentioned that. So just to be clear, that in addition to the retention and of the powers that are necessary to obviously, impact the built environment, and to the extent that the responsibilities associated with running the planning process and the development review process, those responsibilities primarily remain in the new department. There are some details on some responsibilities because now we are directly sister city, departments to other departments that we have looked at whether certain activities, and I mentioned looking at how transportation planning and implementation has been done. Some of that responsibility have been, let's just say, shared with departments now that didn't occur before.
Thank you.
Just to add really briefly, I think it's worth characterizing our changes. It's 3 separate large-scale changes we're undertaking. I think the one we're talking about right now is the administrative, right? The change of how the budgets and the approvals and the hiring and all that works. But there's also the tools and powers, which we spent a lot of time talking about through our home rule petition, how we want to reposition those and the urban renewal era and reposition those tools for future generations. And then there's the third, which I think Kairos really spoke to significantly in his opening statement, which is changing the work that we're doing and our focus and having a predictable zoning code that really means something.
Thank you.
So those are all 3 independent tracks. We could have done any individual one of them, but we're trying to do all 3.
Do you guys know the cost associated with this transition? I know it was a lot of man hours, a lot of time. It was 18 months or whatever of folks and HR and have you. Was there ever a cost associated with the amount of time put into this transition?
I don't think we ever costed it, but it was it was a big effort.
It was a big effort, right. So the BRA EDIC still exists technically and legally, and the funding for this agency has always come from that at no cost to the taxpayer. And mind you, I also remember when it was no cost to the taxpayer, I believe we also won the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize Award. So we did pretty good in the previous iteration, right? We got some, so it was one of those, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, at no cost to the taxpayer. With that said, how do you all see the upcoming budget process playing a role now that you are a city department? Do you anticipate that we have the ability to amend your budget or not? I know that, right, this BRA EDIC power still exists, and there's the transparency on the fiscal side. How do you guys anticipate our role? Do you believe we have the ability to amend your budget through our budget process?
Yes.
Teresa?
Okay.
Yes, you can amend.
Yep. No, okay. Just wanted to make sure. I didn't know. With that other separate agency still existing and not understanding, right, we just need to make sure, well, wait, is there things that we are unable to touch?
So the BPDA board will approve at the April board meeting the potential total transfer amount for FY26. If for some reason the final budget that comes out of the city council and is signed by the mayor is different, the board will go back and reapprove whatever the amended number is.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much. Just a heads up to folks, I understand that this is a very comprehensive topic, so we'll go from 6 to 8 minutes. I also want to just acknowledge that we've been joined by Councillor Weber. I almost said Worrell. I apologize. Councillor Weber. We'll go to Councillor Mejia as the third co-sponsor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here. So just from some context, I think I tend to see this conversation as an opportunity for everyone who's following along to learn and help unpack. And for the record, the reason why my office filed an Office of Inspector General was because during this transition, we were adamant around certain things that we wanted to see in the planning process, where it really put people at the center of decision-making and created some checks and balances because there was some tension between who really does have the power. And it's within that voice in which I am operating here. I think it's important for us to just set the stage. This is our first time together in this formal setting, Chief. So understand that I grew up here in the city of Boston. I have a very historical perspective and trauma around displacement and bouncing from place to place. So anything that deals with issues of planning and development are core to my triggers. So I just want to name all of those things as we continue to have these conversations. And as a community organizer, it's the other lens that I bring into the space, because oftentimes things are being done to us without us. And so I bring in that voice into the space because my job is to be the microphone for the people that I serve. So oftentimes what I bring into the chamber is what I hear out in these streets, not because I have any issues with anyone in particular. So I just want to name all of those things, since we're going to be working together, and I just want you to understand the full depth of how I show up in this space. So I do have some specific questions, and I'm glad we're going to probably go through a few rounds, but you know, now after nearly a year of operating as a city department, I'd love to know what evidence can you present that this transition has led to more community-driven planning rather than continuing the same top-down decision-making that has historically displaced Black, Brown, immigrant, and working-class communities. I'd love for you to explain how you, the continued lack of formalized neighborhood advisory councils or binding community input in major development decisions. It seems that there's still some deficits there. I'm curious about what structural changes will you make to ensure residents are not only consulted, but have veto and approval power. Like, if we're really serious about community-centered planning and development, would love to hear and understand how you see that more formalized. With nearly a year of data and operations, how are you measuring success in addressing historical harms and closing the wealth gap? And where do those results are being reported in real time for public scrutiny? Devin, if you remember, I was really curious about planning and development through a racial equity lens, and also some of the things that we've heard through the Rosendale Coalition, and just kind of like all of that. Would love to hear what that looks like. How do you justify consolidating planning power in one department led by one person accountable only to the mayor, and when decades of the BRA-BPDA operated as an unchecked arm of the city hall? And what is stopping this new structure from repeating that same dynamic? Just with a different branding? I think that is a question that a lot of folks have. We're changing the name, but how are we changing the dynamics in terms of power? How do you respond to residents who feel that community engagement efforts like pop-ups and surveys are performative and designed to wear us down rather than truly incorporate our input into decision-making? What real decision-making power have communities gained? No clapping up in this chamber, please. I don't want to get in trouble. Have communities gained in this process? And then across the city, my office has been in contact with residents who are doing outreach on behalf of the planning department. These individuals from South Boston to Rosendale are walking their own neighborhoods, conducting in-person surveys, and gathering feedback. I recognize that the department may have limited capacity beyond pop-ups and surveys, but there are real people ready, willing, and dedicating their time to this work. And how is this department truly empowering those community leaders, and how can we make this work in a more directive and intentional ways that we're including folks in the process, not excluding them, to ensure that concerns are collected and reflected in decisions rather than just reported out after the fact. I think that it's the afterthought that gets a lot of folks wound up, and I have 3 minutes left for you all to answer those questions, and then I have a binder full of other ones, so stay tuned.
Councillor, thank you for sharing the context of your questions. I appreciate that. Let me just start by saying that I joined the then Boston Redevelopment Authority over 30-some years ago. And one of the things that I've learned during my time as an employee of the Boston Redevelopment Authority, and I learned a lot during that time, and I'd like to contrast that to what I've learned just in the few months that I've returned. I first want to recognize that I've had the opportunity in my new role as Chief of Planning to meet with community members, stakeholder groups, not nearly as much as perhaps I would like to. And one of the things that I find myself learning more about, which I already learned before, was that one of the most important jobs that we as planners, no matter whether we are the most junior planner with the least experience to people like me who've now had 3 decades working in the planning profession, is that we first have to recognize the work that was done in the name of planning to our city. I learned very early on, I think within the first month, when 30 years ago, that the most important thing was that we, as a junior planner at that time, that the most important thing was to recognize the harm that we then as an agency had caused to the community in the name of progress. And I learned very early on that part of the job was to actually atone for those injustices. And the way to atoning is to actually learning how to listen and learning to recognize that what might have had, let's say, on the balance, if you were doing a cost-benefit analysis, that on the balance might have been, it might have had benefits that were greater than the cost. It does not excuse the costs that actually was extracted in those processes.
All right, so I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I know my timer is going to go off, and I asked a lot of questions.
No, I
in the spirit of just making sure that I get through them, I'm just curious if we can dive into.
So can I suggest this, which is that I wanted to provide some context, just as you did, to your viewpoint, just as I'm providing some of the context that because I don't think we can actually answer the questions that you laid out, and I would like to, when the opportunity exists, for us to go to your question one by one, because each one of them actually are profound questions that require time for us to answer, because I don't want to gloss over the complexity of your questions, such as engagement, wealth creation, tracking success, accountability, and incorporating input. Those in themselves require a conversation. Let me just complete and just say to you what I bring to the job. What I mentioned at my opening statement, in addition to my experience as a planner who learned his craft in this agency and recognizing and earlier on how important it was to listen to the people whom I was working for and atoning for the mistakes that were made because of the arrogance that came from the notion of professional planning on behalf of the city, to now or I would say that in the past 10 years, when I was not working for the city, having the benefit of teaching planning and development and understanding how that profession and that industry works, and now coming back to a point where I see part of my job as the chief of this planning department to impart that humility that is required to do our job in the way that it's been described. So I think that if there is one thing that I can bring at this stage of my career and to help the transformation of this planning and development culture is a kind of humility of recognizing the things that we didn't get right, and that learning from that, but also learning from the people whose lives we are impacting can help us do our job better. So I would just say that I look forward to talking more about the challenges that that you've identified that our residents are encountering on a day-to-day basis, where our policies and our methods directly impact, but that I hope that what I can bring is a willingness and openness and a humility of working with you who are representing our citizens and to the communities that actually we work with on a day-to-day basis. So I hope that's a good starting point so that you have some understanding that you should judge my own leadership of this planning department through the attitude that I bring, rather than sort of the action that we take. So I want to, I apologize for not answering your questions directly, but I hope that we will have the opportunity as this hearing continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And Councilman here, if you want to submit those for an RFI so that we can get a formal response on behalf of the agency, excuse me, not the agency, the planning department. But if you have another question that you'd like to ask as a lead sponsor, I want to make sure.
So that I am clear, this is a hearing for us to understand how this agency has been working since, right? And I think the questions that I've asked, I'd like to get answers to during the second round. I just think out of fairness for the public who is here, I think if it's okay with you, Chair, instead of submitting it in writing, I'd love to hear from the administration to have some time between while we wait for my second round. I just think out of the process, I've come prepared to engage in this hearing with that intention, and that's to better understand how the planning department is working since it's been here, and these questions are crucial to my understanding. So I would prefer not to have to send something in writing. I would prefer the administration to answer these questions while we're here together, because it might inspire me to think about something else that I didn't think about, and that is the process of what these hearings are for. So
I look forward to that. May I just ask that,
Chief,
because I made a number of, your questions were complex questions that deserve, our consideration. Would it be possible in the second round that you identify the questions in the order of priority so that we touch on, for instance, if you can say that if the first question we want to talk about is the engagement process and how we process feedback, or is the policies that we're developing now towards wealth creation, or is it specifically about the administrative systems that we're putting in place to track how business is done differently by our department? If you can provide some prioritization of that, it would help us get to the real content, and I look forward to sharing the content as much as possible.
In the next round, we will get there. I do want to be respectful of everybody that has come here and tried to be involved in the conversation. Council Mejia has provided really thoughtful, profound questions that require thoughtful, profound answers. And if we can get to that in the next round, I think that would be great. But I do know that my colleagues are also here and have questions that they want to ask. So with that, I will move to, I believe the next person is Councilor Flynn. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the administration team that is here. I have some questions that I'll direct questions, and hopefully I can get them all in. The MOU that was referenced in the ordinance, was that ever completed? Is it public, and who wrote it?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, the memorandum of understanding referenced in the ordinance, was it ever completed? Is it public, and who wrote it?
So yes, it's completed and signed by both the city and the BPDA. I think you're referring to the finance MOA.
Yeah, section 8-14.5.
So the finance MOA is completed. It was worked on by both the city staff and the planning department staff and the BPDA, and it was approved by the board as well.
Could I get a copy of that?
We're happy to send you a copy.
All
It's
right,
also on
excellent.
our website as well.
All right, thank you.
Just really quick, you are supposed to submit it to the council as well, too. So please be sure that
Yeah,
that's
we will.
submitted to us.
I think we may have, but we'll make sure we do that.
Thank you. Since the ordinance was passed, what amount of cash transfer into the city came from the BRA? Did the transfer fees cover the entire payroll or only a fraction? Do they exceed payroll?
So we have transferred, I think it's about $22 million. It has covered all of our expenses thus far.
Okay.
And we have one final payment left for the fourth quarter.
Okay. Chief, do you still answer to the BRA board?
When I serve, I guess pro bono, and as the director of the BPDA, I do have those responsibilities, yes.
Okay. Were the millions of dollars of consulting fees consumed by the BRA handled the same way, or are they still paid directly by the BRA?
Teresa?
So the contracts that we had existing at the time of the transfer continued on the BPDA side. Any new contracts since the creation of the planning department will be procured through the city. We will continue to have the property, the EDIC and the BRA still continue to own property. So those procurements and contracts, property-related, will remain on the agency side.
Okay. Is there anyone else still being paid by the BRA?
By the BRA?
Yeah.
There are just the board members,
They're being paid by the BRA?
the board
Okay.
members.
Do we have an accounting for all of those payments?
An accounting of the salaries?
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Do we have a public accounting for all BRA revenue?
So we have so yes, our audited financials are on the website for both the BRA and the EDIC, and that includes revenue and expenses.
Okay. What assets and liabilities are still with the BRA's 121B structure?
So by assets and liabilities, are you talking about property and cash? I'm not sure how that relates to 121B.
Yeah, cash, property, anything of value.
So yeah, so the audited financials have all of that laid out. I can get them to you so you can see on both the EDIC and the BRA side.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful. Is there a regular public accounting for this? And why is there a separate balance sheet still cloaked in by the BRA?
So the BPDA budget is approved annually by the board. Additionally, the audited financials are always available on the website. Does that answer your question?
So if the public wants this information, they just have to go to the website?
They should, yeah.
Do they know where to look for that?
There's a finance section on the website.
So that's easy for them to track it? Okay.
Depending on how good they are with maneuvering websites.
It's also covered at our board meetings in a public forum.
Okay. What accounting system is used to track the large amounts of city tax revenue abated for developers by BRA-driven 121A, 121B agreements?
So every 121A and 121B agreement is posted to the city's website by the city's assessor's office. Anything that will require action of the BPDA board, which is in most of those agreements, requires a vote in a public hearing, which we perform.
Okay.
And I believe the assessor is responsible for tracking.
Yeah, the payments.
Correct.
Okay. So these abatements represent a long-term city, not BRA, financial obligation.
Exactly. Exactly. As covered earlier in the hearing, the BPDA receives no tax revenue and so receives no financial support from city government.
Okay, so can you say again, where does this end up on the balance sheet, on the city's balance sheet?
It's probably a better question for the CFO, but those are revenues that are foregone. They're taxes that are uncollected through whether it's a full abatement or a partial abatement. Each tax agreement is different, but those are negotiated through the city's assessor and, when necessary, ratified by the BPDA board in a public hearing. They are not things that our staff are independently negotiating.
Are there any taxes that anyone still owes to the BRA?
I do not believe so, no. The land owned by the BPDA is tax exempt by definition. We do collect pilot agreements, and the city collects those on our behalf in most cases, and I don't believe there are any arrearages.
Okay, maybe I should not use the word tax, but is there any money that anyone owes to the BRA?
Got it. So our primary source of revenue is real estate rents from our various land holdings, whether that's ground leases or operational leases. Like any landlord, there at any period of time there might be a minor balance of arrearages as we're working out business issues. We track that on a monthly basis, and we generally quickly resolve them. We can get you the current arrearage amount.
Anything significant outstanding?
No.
Anything going back years?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Okay, so everybody's up to date in their payments to the BRA, EDIC?
Within the last month or two.
Yeah, we have an aging report that our staff goes over on a regular basis, and a progressive series of efforts that we take to collect rent collection. In most cases, if there's an arrearage issue, it has to do with a business issue, and we try to be a good landlord and work out repayment schemes and other things like that.
Okay. So if someone was behind in their rent, would it go into a collection agency?
No, we handle that ourselves. Maybe it's worth just telling a story quickly about during 2020, 2021, during the COVID crisis, we did have a significant number of businesses that owed us back rent because they weren't getting revenues due to the pandemic, and we found ways to renegotiate rent agreements with all of those individual companies, posted all to our website, took votes to our boards. In many cases, that involved deferment of payment to a later date. There was some forgiveness, but most cases it was deferment.
And have they paid that?
Yeah. Or they are paying the whatever was negotiated.
So the deferments, that means it's wiped out?
No,
payments?
it means if you say you owed us $100,000, rather than us say you must pay us $100,000 today, we say you have 5 years left on your lease, so let's spread that $100,000 out in small payments over 5 years.
Has any companies gone out of business that failed
Yes.
to pay their rent?
Yeah, that has happened. Absolutely.
Could I get a list of those and how much they owed?
Yeah, we can do that.
And why
Councilor
didn't?
Flynn, if you have one more question, because time is up.
Okay. No, my time is up. I want to be respectful to my colleagues. Thank you.
And Councillor, can I just correct, the amount that we have sent to the city is 26 million currently.
Thank you. Councilor Durkin?
Thank you so much. I just want to first start by thanking those who facilitated this change, including brilliant minds at BPDA Legal, now the Planning Department Legal, Lisa Harrington, Mallory Toomey Shea, Matt Donovan, which are some of the brightest minds that work for our city. I'm also grateful to Michael O'Shea for his work on the technology side. I know that some of this felt for the team. Everybody was under a pressure cooker to get this done, and I really appreciate the work that everyone put in. Since Councilor Flynn brought up 121A agreements, it's kind of funny. Last night, I was thinking, as I do before I go to bed, about how to unlock housing in the city of Boston. One of my core questions in the transition was just, how do we ensure that the economic engine and economic vitality of the city remains one of the top priorities of the planning department, and that political will not get in the way of solving some of our biggest challenges, like our housing crisis. And two ideas I came up with, and I think now Chief Shen is pretty used to me just having a bunch of ideas and sort of bubbling up, and maybe he'll tell me why this can't happen. But I had two ideas last night. The first being that 121A agreements for buildings over 100 residential units. In my district alone, between the 415 Newbury, Trinity Financial approval, the 2 Charles Gate West approval, Fenway Corners West, the residential part of that, 1550 Tremont, 80 to 100 Smith, and 819 Beacon Street, which all were approved in the last few years in District 8. That would, if we were able to sort of come to an agreement to get these buildings going, that's 1,500 units of housing. So I'm just curious if the city has considered sort of a special category or just a policy idea around just unlocking. And the reason I did over 100 units of residential units is I just realized that would capture a lot of the housing in my district, and not all of it was based on height. Some, like the Trinity Financial building is a little bit shorter, so I don't think height really gets at it. It's really about amount of units. Is that something that you've thought about? And then my second idea was for lab to housing conversions. Obviously, there was a moment in our city when a lot of people were permitting lab, and the reason for that being that there was a financial incentive from those that were, financing these projects. Obviously, we want to see housing. What we would need to do to facilitate that is really a renegotiation of public benefits for those projects who may have sort of over committed in the sense of like what they're able to do while they're building housing, which has different financial models. And then the third, which is really interesting, is a lot of cities around the country are doing district parking. So we found out during this transition that the BPDA, now the planning department, or BRA, I guess, still owns these parcels, owns a lot of open surface parking lots. Have we thought about building district parking in our neighborhoods to make sort of, especially in District 8, where car ownership is low, but people who need to come to the city, like the Longwood Medical Area, et cetera, to work, to go to the hospital and other things might benefit from district parking. So those are my 3 questions. Let me know what you think, Chief. I really appreciate all of your thoughts, and I appreciate all of our partnership.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate you sharing your ideas with us. I think that there are no bad ideas, because I think that there are, in most urban policy, there are just different degrees of how extensive an impact new ideas can have. So let me address the few that you've put on the table. It doesn't have the benefit of the sort of us as a whole department engaging in it. And I just would say that we have instituted a series of structural changes in how different ideas are batted around, and how we assign the sort of subsequent work to test out these ideas. This was something that Chief Jameson already instituted, of which Devon has been diligently sort of managing for us. And these are twice a week we have these decisions and deliberations and decision meetings where the entire senior staff get together and actually bring up new ideas.
Just invite me next time. I'll be there.
Thank you for the suggestion. I would say that we have been working very closely with Sheila Dillon and the Mayor's Office of Housing in looking at different ways of accelerating development, housing, residential projects in particular. We have looked at not the unit threshold, but square footage threshold. With respect to whether there is an associated program for 121A tax abatement. That's a larger question. I would just say that prior to my arrival, Devon and Chief Jameson had considered a number of ideas of potential 121A abatement programs that might actually accelerate some of the already approved projects into actual groundbreaking and actual construction. I think at this particular moment, how does individual future tax abatements and how it impacts the financial well-being of the city in general are questions that I know I have been part of the administration that are considering this. I would just assure you here, may I just highlight maybe some of the difference between how considerations like that might have occurred at the BPDA versus how we operate today. Today, this is not a decision that the BPDA and the director and the board are considering without the oversight of and input of other city departments. Today, today this would be a cabinet level discussion with the mayor and all the other cabinet chiefs that have a jurisdiction over those kinds of decisions. I would say that with the continual change in the valuation of offices in general and the long-term impact of that valuation change to the city's long-term health, I think we need to be especially careful as we consider these individual agreements with developers, even when they're developing the ideal projects that are addressing a critical need of the city. So I would just say that that decision-making process is much more transparent and open. I would say that we can share at Devon, if we have time, some of the ideas of what kind and what level of abatement could occur. I think there are some new ideas that we are interested in sort of testing. So on your second question, from labs to housing, I think the notion that there is an excess of lab space in our market, that is accurate. However, I think that the typology and physical dimension and layout of lab space is not immediately conducive for conversion into residential.
Oh, sorry, I'll just clarify that I meant approved lab projects, so not already built projects.
Yes, but the approved projects, they would, for them to do that, they would have to change their actual design, which would mean that the benefit of having an already approved project would be moot, because essentially the design change would be significant enough that they would have to go through a notice of project change.
Well, that's
procedure.
kind of what I'm getting at, because we have actually made other decisions to streamline certain processes. So I think we should be looking at incentivizing a conversion of priorly approved lab to housing.
I think that the trade-off would be whether there would be enough scrutiny of the change. In other words, that because the uses are so different, there are also financial implications, because obviously a lab which is approved to provide development impact exactions, transitioning and going into a residential project, that would no longer apply. But I take your point that if there is a project, or I would say rather, if there are critical sites that are currently approved as lab, that actually would be better located for new residential development. That's certainly something that I think are worth for us to consider. And let me just touch on the last one.
Thank you.
Because
Very
I know,
quickly, Chief Shen.
Actually, I would say that the Boston Common Garage is the first and perhaps one of the most successful district-wide garages. It also has a way of actually allowing the public to generate revenue. So I think that the idea of district-wide parking as opposed to distributed individually, privately owned parking is an idea worth consideration.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Councillor Durkin. Councillor Braden?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a few things. I'm just looking in the list of the hearing order, and in the list there's discuss the department's strategic plans and initiatives for the future. And I know we're going to have a bigger discussion this afternoon, evening about BESS facilities. But I'm just wondering in terms of what planning, and I appreciate that transitioning the BPDA into the City Planning Department has taken a huge amount of effort on your folk department, but the issue about BESS, electric battery energy storage systems,
Yep.
really important, because it helps. It's estimated that we need about 10 or 11 of these facilities across the city to meet our goals for 2030 for our energy goals and our climate goals. So I'm just wondering, like, where we're at with that. Like, I know there's a significant process going on at the state, and they're really the ones that are going to drive the bus on this. But and then we're also talking about publicly owned land that the BPDA has stewardship of. Are we doing an inventory of land that's available for these sort of, just as we are doing an inventory of surface parking lots as a, district parking lots across the city? There are those sort of needs that are always there. And then the other concern I had was, just really in this moment, this moment of craziness at our national level. And we don't really have a good, clear idea of what's going to happen with HUD, but for any sort of civil rights actions like fair housing or diversity, equity and inclusion policies all seem to be under fire by the administration. Where do we stand with AFFH? Like, that's something that's a huge priority for us in the city. Are we expecting any consequential action by the government, by the administration in Washington that would impact that? And then the other big concern is just displacement. I think we're making a zoning code to modernise that's more modern and predictable, and it's based on a citywide needs assessment. One big concern I have is that we're seeing the displacement of some small businesses, and then also just the displacement of working and middle class families and people who call Boston home. It's increasingly difficult for them to afford to stay here. So we do have a serious housing crisis. But how do we balance all those things and still make progress? And if you have anything else to add in terms of your strategic forward planning, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Let me just start by, there is a separate hearing regarding the BESS facilities.
Evening, yeah.
Can I just add one thing, that the reason why I would say that I know that the siting of these facilities are very controversial, but because of to transition to a decarbonized electric grid, what's required is that these facilities are distributed to where the needs are. So just like substations, you can't concentrate all the substation in one area and provide that and have the kind of physical buffer and isolation that would minimize the impact on residential community. And the greatest user and need for the distributed location of BESS facilities relate to the fact that they need to be where people are using and requiring this energy. The one issue in particular, and I know that the staff that will be coming to the hearing will address, is the fact that unlike the rest of the grid, there is a need for private investment into BESS facilities. So unlike the substations, which are all owned by the power company and regulated by the state at the, as industry, this is a new category of land use that will be part of our energy transition. Mm-hmm. So, obviously from the planning department, we are working on, creating this new category of use, and then developing a set of standards through which how these uses should be managed when it's developed and proposed by the private sector. So that's number one. Number two, publicly owned land. I think we can talk more about, I think you mentioned it in particular specific to maybe is it a way to help cite these best facilities. Again, we have an excellent inventory of all the land that the BPDA owns. I don't know that they are distributed and located in the places where, these best facilities are actually required. But we're happy to do additional work and do that audit. On fair housing and DEI policies, I would say that at least for the planning department, we continue to operate under the policies prior to this federal administration. And I would say that in the disposition and in our any related RFP, where we have in the past adopted DEI-related policies, those are still in place. We have not changed those.
That's good.
On fair housing, I know that Chief Jameson had made a number of commitments, especially related to an audit of fair housing policies that the planning department is engaged in. That actually, we are about to issue a new RFP to hire a consultant to do that audit for us. And then finally, displacement. I will note that there is a brand new anti-displacement action plan that has been published. It was the work that one of our staff members led, Catherine Lusk, who is the manager of the Planning Advisory Council. This is a document that has been vetted by the administration. I urge you to examine that action plan, and we would be happy to return to answer any of the questions related to some of the tools that we, as an administration, have to mitigate displacement, direct displacement in particular, from any development. And we also cover not only residential displacement, we also cover tools that are available to us for commercial development, as well as a broader category of cultural displacement.
There's a hearing on that, I believe, on Monday. We'll be
I've
back.
got a little bit more time. Just in terms of your cooperation and collaboration with other city departments, the one big one that I think of is the BTD.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how that's going. And then also the demography and research capacity. I know you were in Mayor Menino's administration. They used to do incredibly great reports and research projects that are still very valuable to us as we think about policy in the city. So in terms of the robustness and the capacity of the research department, and then also, yeah, that's it.
So let me just say that research continues to be one of the services that the planning department provides for the entire administration. Before we became a planning department, the research department at the Boston Redevelopment Authority has been tracking the economic indicators for the city for now, for over 50 years. And we continue to be the resource for, the city in general. You should know that one of the most important research work that our team has been engaged in has been to actually review the census data and to actually offer an alternative, we believe, more accurate count census of our city. And it's counter and different. It comes to a different conclusion than the Census Bureau because it was conducted at the time during COVID. The Census Bureau, in spite of the fact that we have provided all the evidence to show that our city continues to grow, that they're not actually able to use our more accurate data. But we have been making sure that the entire city, all of the departments that relate to services, is using the new corrected census, I would say the corrected census data that is being provided by the planning department's research department.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor
Madam Chair.
Burden. Councilor Weber?
Thank you, Chair. So just following up on the anti-displacement action plan, in there, one of the tools is the displacement disclosure form, which I think is going to be worked on. Maybe you'll address this in more detail on Monday, but I guess my question is, how does that how do we make that an effective tool and not just some pro forma thing that people file on the way to get approval?
Devin, do you want to try that?
Sure. So we've actually done a lot of work investigating displacement from Article 80 scale projects. And one thing that we found is that the high-quality developers, high-quality development, are already doing this work. They're already looking at the tenants that are on the site there and finding ways to relocate them or in many cases, invite them back. So what I think we're hoping to do is daylight where good work is already happening to ensure, for example, a very significant, culturally significant restaurant returns to the property. And in other cases where a developer maybe isn't acting as pro-socially, be able to establish that as a priority through the mitigation discussions and hold that developer accountable for making that a priority. That needs to be weighed against all the other mitigation that we might want to ask a development to perform, but we'll have the opportunity to do that because we'll have the information.
Okay, and the planning department will develop that form? Is that?
Yeah, exactly.
And will we be involved? What's the process to develop this?
That's a great question. I think we should come back on Monday and talk to you a little bit more about the details.
Okay. So getting back to the home rule petition, it discusses property transfers. There's a line in there, the city may transfer to or acquire from the BPDA real property according to existing statutory processes. So I guess, has there been any transfers of property? Maybe this has been discussed already, but.
I do not believe that we've transferred any. Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, I don't think we haven't performed any property transfers.
Okay. We haven't acquired.
To or from.
Okay. No. And in terms of financial transfers, I think you said 26 million. So in terms of the budget for the next fiscal year, I'm assuming we're all in the same fiscal year. It's supposed to be, according to the home rule petition, the annual budget will be based on the amount of the financial transfers estimated to be received by the city in the upcoming fiscal year. So has that estimated number? I don't know. It might.
No, just clarifying that it's not the home rule petition, it's the ordinance.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize to
It's important to make sure
offend
we
the
have the
chairs.
difference of the two.
So yeah, you're correct. So just in the ordinance, are we expecting the same number? Has that estimated number been produced yet?
So yes, we're still working on finalizing the estimated number, but the BPDA board will approve that number in April. It is, I believe, a little bit higher for next fiscal year because of the pension costs that were not factored into the first year. So it will be higher, and we also have smaller contractual, so it almost evens out, but it's.
Okay, thank you. And just on the annual report, my staff, and I think at least maybe the chair staff, it includes these, financial statements at the end. We could not access the FY24 capital expenses. The link goes to somewhere which says you have to be a member of the planning department to access it. So I don't know if we could figure that out.
We will update the permissions and let you and council.
Send us a PDF.
Yeah, exactly.
Be great. Okay, so Chief Shen, I guess I think we've talked about this before, but the seaport, you were here for that. I guess. With the benefit of hindsight, you talked about learning from, from the past. I think that's seen, as sort of a missed opportunity. But how should we look at the seaport in terms of planning, and how is the change that we've made, with the planning department, going to help us in the future? I don't know, apply those lessons. So how should we be looking at the seaport now? And is anything different? Would anything be different if we have the planning department within city under under city government back then, or, when the next area that gets developed, how would that play out now?
I think the seaport's lesson is, or constraint was, how much public investment was associated with the private investment. As you know, that at the time when the initial planning was going on, the public investment that was really that was in that whole area was with the transportation roadway system, sort of the construction and extension of I-90, and also the Silver Line connection. Those were deemed at that time it was an extensive amount of public money, mostly federal money, and then as the project sort of scope grew, eventually approximately 25% state money in order to complete all of that work. And the city did not really have any direct commitments on city-level scale infrastructure. And so the challenge of the seaport was leveraging that almost entirely through through private funding, through the development review process. So the end result is that, we had primarily a new public realm local roadway system that was virtually entirely paid for by the private developers. And to that extent, there was not the level of, let's just say, community benefits that we, if the city had allocated infrastructure dollars at the city side, that we were able to leverage additional and use the money, the private investment and mitigation or community benefits, instead of paying for city level roadways, for other benefits that might have addressed some of the issues where the area falls short. So I think there's no secret that there's a question about the level of the types of residential product, real estate product that was created compared to many of the existing neighborhoods. The number of, let's say, affordable units and even, let's say, workforce units is less than what we otherwise would want in a brand new neighborhood. To the extent that in the new planning department, one of our jobs is to actually begin to coordinate public city-level investment. I would like to think that as we proceed our work as a planning department, that we could be much more judicious about how private and public investment are balanced, so that the outcome would be different than the kind of programmatic and real estate sort of distribution outcome that we see in the seaport. I hope that gives you, I'm happy to continue this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Weber. Hold myself to my own rules. I'll start with one question that actually came to me in a community meeting in the North End from the North End Waterfront Residents Alliance. What would be your response to criticism that the mayor hasn't fulfilled her promise of abolishing the BPDA?
Well, let's put it this way. I think that I think at the time when that idea came about, abolishing the BPDA, I think there was never really the kind of in-depth sort of thinking about what that really would mean and entail. I do not believe that that vision of abolishing the BPDA was to say that the powers and the tools that a city needs that happen to, historically reside in an agency like the BPDA was no longer useful. In fact, I think part of the premise of the transformation and the creation of the planning department is to make sure that those tools are appropriately, deployed at the kind of urgent problems that are defined by today's context, and not a context that existed, 50 years ago, or actually now closer to 70 years ago. So I would say to the person who's making that argument that I don't think it's useful for us to debate that in that abstract level, but to actually ask that the person who is leveling that critique, what are some of the things that a new planning department, what are the responsibilities of a new planning department? How does it serve the public? And to the degree that we're talking specifically about the North End, what are some of the responsibilities that this critic have that feel like we haven't addressed? So I would rather sort of engage in a concrete discussion about the role and responsibility of the planning department rather than to interrogate this question in an abstract way about, what does abolition of an agency actually means.
And just want to add to this, just going back to Councillor Fitzgerald's question earlier, and that there's really, the three big reforms we're doing, that the report authored by the mayor does advise creating a city planning department like every other major American city does, and folding responsibility oversight for fiscal transactions into that. So we've done that, completed, and we're here promoting that. The home rule petition that changes the tools and powers does in fact abolish the BRA and EDIC, and that is the title of the home rule petition. It does replace them with a planning board that carries forward some of the tools that are necessary for Boston's future that Kairos just spoke to. And that bill has passed this council, it's passed the state House of Representatives, and it hasn't passed the state Senate yet, but we remain advocating for it. And then the third part, changing the work of the department so that we have a zoning code that's enforced at a development process that's predictable. That's the ongoing work of our team, and it's not going to get done overnight, but it will, and it takes many years of efforts, but we're very, very far along in getting that done.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that succinctly. Councilor Weber asked my question on the financial transfer, although in the report, it does say, so I appreciate the transparency in providing those reports. We fought really hard to get the community benefits agreements to be publicized and available for residents. Within the report, it says that the planning department this year has dispersed $9.7 and change million in community benefits and mitigation funds from project escrow accounts managed by the developer compliance unit and finance division. Your accounting is good, it checks out, although the Excel sheet that I'm in, I think the word that I will use is insufficient, and just asking for a greater accounting of where the funds are coming from and where they're going. So for example, for one of the Charlestown items, it just says Charlestown mitigation in the amount of $5,900, and it says that it's going to Charlestown mitigation. I just want to know what that is. We do have other instances that are pretty clear. 282 Bremen Street, which is $30,000. I walked through that intersection quite a bit. I can assume that it went to pedestrian safety improvements, but it doesn't say it, so I don't actually know. So just asking if that can be rectified and if it can get a little bit more specific.
So the Charlestown mitigation question we can answer. I will have to check on whether or not we can specifically say what all of the funds went for, what the purpose was, but I will check and see if we have that information.
Okay. I would prefer that we could, so if you can get back to me on that, I would appreciate that. Will we be able to have a retroactive look back into 2023, 2022, maybe going back all the way until 2020 with community benefit agreements? Because one of the fair criticisms is that the institutional knowledge that is lost when folks leave the agency, it largely lives within, the MOUs, obviously, but there were things that have gotten lost.
So I want to give Teresa and her staff member, Aaron Hallquist, some credit for creating a database that actually tracks all these financial commitments. We've done a lot of work to improve that. So I prefer to Teresa about the availability of the data, but that's something we've been hard at work at.
We certainly have. I will check. We should be able to pull that information. It's captured in our general ledger. It may not have the level of detail you're looking for the past year, but we can certainly tell you who funds were paid for and what project or what account they came from.
Okay. Going to the Planning Advisory Council, I was always really excited about this because we really needed something that was able to go to various departments and inform their decisions about what their budget asks are. And the Planning Advisory Council has been informed by neighborhood needs analysis or assessments that have already happened. For example, Plan Charlestown had said that we needed another ambulance bay, we need another firehouse. How has the Planning Advisory Council informed the upcoming FY26 budget? And I guess what can they show for it? What have they done so far that we could demonstrate to the community that this planning process and the neighborhood needs assessment was worthwhile?
So one of the charges of the Planning Advisory Council is to track the implementation of progress against plans. So they have a staff person, a role that is exclusively dedicated to that. And one of the things we've been talking about each council meeting is, all right, how are we doing? Are we, because some of these things are long-term capital investments, and they're going to take several years to fund and several years to get into construction and get done, but we need to be making incremental progress in order to deliver on those commitments. And then some things are much smaller, right? There are many as you well know from both East Boston and Plan Charlestown, sometimes just getting the stop sign at the intersection means a whole lot to a whole lot of people and a whole lot to the traffic patterns in the neighborhood, so making sure those things are also implemented. So they've developed the system for tracking that. It is well aligned with the budget process. They got their reports out to the various departments prior to their budget submissions. I know we're in the process now of formulating the budget, and that will come before the council shortly, and then I think we'll be able to answer that question even more concretely.
Thank you. And my last question, very quick, yes or no, is East Boston going to be getting their promised neighborhood needs assessment for public safety within the year?
For the public safety?
So we will, what we actually have done is put out an RFP for a citywide.
The citywide, no, I
needs
know,
assessment.
but will East Boston get their public safety assessment that was promised by Chief Jameson?
I would assume it is part of that process, but I don't want to commit that until talking to the team. We will answer that question.
Okay,
It's a great question.
I need a yes, but thank you.
yes.
All right, we'll go back to
I think the answer is yes,
leads.
but I want to make sure.
Okay, I think the answer is yes, is what he said for the record. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Murphy for a second round, and we'll keep it, oh, she's not here. We'll go to Councillor Fitzgerald for another round of 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of comments, more than questions to start off. The Article 80 modernization, I know you guys are defining mitigation and community benefit packages and having standard metrics for the contribution to that. I'd just like to say, I know it's for the sake of transparency, and that's why we went through this whole process. But I still feel that might come back to bite us when in terms of you have to be flexible, right? And different communities require different things and there may be a chance. I would hate to miss out on the chance where we could have got more, but the developer says, I'm meeting the requirements, that's all I have to do, right? So I just think that way of approaching it, at least under the community benefits, as long as you have a strong team and leadership, you guys should be able to negotiate for those. And I do have faith in you guys to do that. So I just advise against that metric for mitigation. The Plan Advisory Committee, I still see transparency lacking there. I know that's sort of been a common theme throughout, like who are they, when do they meet, what do they actually talk about? And I'm not sure if folks, both in the agency and in the public, understand exactly the role of the Planning Advisory Committee and what they are committed to do. What is their task given? But to questions, I notice in every project you guys approve, as always, after the board, it comes out, there's the project, and here's how many jobs are created, how many permanent jobs, construction jobs, how many square footage, how many affordable housing units, all that stuff that everyone wants to see. But in every single one of them, and I know I'm going to catch my own stuff for this, but I'm a big fan of bikes, but in every single one, there is a bike lane infrastructure, or bike infrastructure commitment. And while people can be on one side or the other bike lanes, my concern with that is is that money that would have been a community benefit that is now going to a different fund for something some communities might not want, right? So it's like, oh, this building built in Dorchester, $10,000 to bike infrastructure. I don't actually want bike infrastructure. I would have rathered money, I'm talking as a constituent, I would have rathered that $10,000 go to the Leahy Holleran Community Center. Is it one from the other to do that? Because I feel the community gets robbed and is having a benefit forced upon them when they might not want it, when there could be other benefits that money supports.
Do you want to? So let me just say that actually you mentioned that one of the things that the Article 80 modernization is calling for is a clearer definition between mitigation and community benefits. Mm-hmm. Mitigation is required based on the impact of the project. My understanding, as it relates to bike infrastructure, is directly related to the TAPA, which is the Transportation Access Plan Agreement, right, which is the plan that every developer has to sign with the city in order to make sure that all the transportation impacts are mitigated. So in many of these cases, the projects that you're talking about have been relieved from a lower parking ratio, or in some cases no parking. And in order to, and they may be within or depending on how far they are from the nearest transit kind of location, the bike infrastructure is integral to sort of mitigating the transportation impact. My understanding...
In theory.
No, I mean, I think in principle, meaning that the principle that we and our staff engage in is to make sure that the bike infrastructure is not an additional benefit, but part of the required mitigation for the project. The public benefits are over and beyond mitigation. That's my understanding. Now, I do think that one of the reasons why we're embarking on this Article 80 sort of modernization is to clarify for people that mitigation is required and it's part of doing business, and the public benefits is to address sort of the potential, in some cases, the size and specific use that in gaining community support and providing benefits that are not directly associated with the functioning or good functioning of the project itself. And that's the principle that we apply. Has it been confused? And I do know that some developers have the same part of, let's say, resources that they allocate to community benefits and mitigation. But that's not how the city and our staff look at it.
But on a ledger, if as a developer, would I not say, well, this mitigation required, but at an added cost, just like when we tax anything else in this city, someone else is usually picking up the tab, right, to make up for it. And I worry that on the ledger, okay, $10,000 for bike infrastructure for this project in any neighborhood, that means I'm not giving that money. That's coming out of my community benefit pool that I would have otherwise given the community.
I can understand how some people see it that way, but that's not the principle under which we're operating. And I will make sure that as we go forward, we clarify for folks. And look, we talked a little bit earlier on about the energy transition and the kinds of land uses that are necessary. In my view, the city becoming more livable and more pedestrian-friendly distribution, and not being so reliant on single occupancy vehicles and cars. Part of it requires us to build up a part of the infrastructure that never existed in our city. And I understand that in some cases, we could approach that transformation in a more deliberate and thoughtful way. But I think that the private portion that we can leverage through, developers and their investment is an important component of that.
Great. Thank you, Director. Mentioned a lot about squares and streets and the importance of squares and streets in planning and local neighborhoods, and I am a fan of identifying areas for development, density around transit-oriented development, retail first floor, housing above, trying to, kill a lot of birds with one stone, right? And I think it's great. Dorchester Squares and Streets was put on pause. Do we know why?
So actually, I would say that we are working obviously in Fields Corner, which is the one area, actually the two areas that we're working on. My understanding is actually on Wednesday, we are going out to Fields Corner to, advance the discussion with the community on Fields Corner, Squares and Streets. So I don't think it's paused. I think that just as I think Councillor Mahia identified that clearly there are difference of many people expressing their concern about the Squares and Streets program. I think we're being more deliberate to be more responsive, and rather than to sort of advance this without hearing people and spending the necessary time to do more work around and studying the implications of Squares and Streets in specific areas, that's what we're doing in Dorchester. And I hope that we will, it's my understanding we will be continuing that work, but we're going to be much more deliberative and open and engaging people who have different concerns.
All three of you, thank you very much. It's good to see you, and thank you for answering difficult questions as well. I'm sorry I have to run, but again, always a pleasure to see you all.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Next up is Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, how would you prefer to go about this? Do you want to do your questions in sequential order? And then
No.
once we hit eight minutes, we can do multiple rounds if you'd like.
No, I am learning how to adapt to the environment I'm in, and I'm going to shrink into the space. So I'm going to consolidate some of my questions.
Okay.
Hopefully that will help.
Yep.
And I just want to be clear that I think I'm a clear reflection of the community that I serve, because we don't, even though I've been here for 5 years, I'm still learning how to show up in a space that can embrace us and our little rough edges. So I appreciate your patience with me. So I just think my questions are more general in regards to the community engagement process, right? So if you could just help me understand your decision-making model. Like, what does that look like now, a year in? What changes have you made, and what have you heard from community, and how you have adapted to what you've heard?
So why don't I suggest this, which is that when I arrived, I actually inherited something that Devon and Chief Jameson already started, and I would just counterpoint and say, preface that before I turn it over to Devon, that the way that we did engagement when I was last here about a decade ago is very different than the way that we do it now. And Devon, perhaps you can sort of lay out, we have actually, just to preface, we now have a separate department, essentially, that sole purpose is actually on community engagement. So Devon, would you share some of the details?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I think part of your question from earlier is how do we ensure that community members don't experience engagement that feels performative, but rather feels like, and actually not just feels, but actually is.
That is, with outcomes and measurable outcomes that we can point to. Oh, the community was opposed to X, Y, and Z. Millions of people showed up to testify. And we still moved in a different direction.
Yeah.
That level of, like, how is this different now that we're moving in a different direction?
Right. So to start with just some of the inputs, so then and then go to the outputs. So the inputs, like Kairos mentioned, is we have a community engagement team now. It's multilingual. We're abiding by a language access plan that ensures that whenever we go out into community, we are reaching people in the language that they actually speak. Or doing appropriate translation.
Are we doing that from a place of, like, let's say, for instance, Rosendale, they have a high Latino speaking population. Are you looking at the percentage of people who live in that neighborhood, and those are the folks that we're looking at in terms of listening, and those are the ones that we're being held accountable to?
Yeah.
Is it that level of?
Exactly.
And do we have measurement tools?
And we try to track data to hold ourselves accountable about who we're actually reaching. And I know folks from Rosendale have actually worked with us to say, like, hey, look, that you can see from our first set of meetings that we are predominantly interacting with people who are predominantly white, predominantly more wealthy, and predominantly homeowners, and that does not actually reflect the true diversity of Roslindale. So that's something that we worked to correct. We did Spanish language business walking tours, we did Spanish language meeting, and I credit the community members who helped bring that to our attention.
And then, Chief, earlier you said that, you've been having meetings with folks. I understand that someone who's always been on the outside of everything, that sometimes we pick and choose who we listen to. So I'm just curious, who have you been in communication with? And is it a general sense of everyone, or are we picking and choosing who we're engaging in with?
I think my own one-on-one meetings, I've basically agreed to meet with everybody who's reached out who want to meet with me. So those range from obviously many of the participants in our and project proponents, of course, developers, but also many of the community groups who have extended invitations for me to come and meet with them. Last Friday I was at the Downtown North Association. I will be going to the North End Waterfront Association actually later this week. I was at the Roxbury Strategic Master Plan Oversight Committee. I have been to, so just that to list a few.
That's great.
And again, I've said whenever possible, I've made myself available and happy to answer any questions. As I said, I can't do this job well unless I'm willing to listen and engage with folks.
That's great, thank you. Can you just talk to us a little bit about what the policy is for conflict of interest of former BPDA employees? What does that look like under this construct?
It's the same as
Always?
the state's conflict of interest law applies to both quasi-governmental employees, the BPDA employees, and also City of Boston employees. So there's been no changes. Same confidential law that counselors are held to.
So I guess some of the questions that we've been getting from folks is around the demographic projections. And there is some question about whether or not they are void of any conflict of interest, since so much of it is development driven. So for example, the Boston Federal Reserve Bank has 3 times a report of the Boston population that is shrinking, but the mayor's office of housing, I guess, is relying on BPDA to report claims of population going to 770,000 people, which seems to be some sort of discrepancy. So who are we exactly building when we're thinking about luxury building, significant vacant single homes? We're looking at, turning over with elders who are, boomers. They don't want to live in luxury towers. So kind of like, where's the thinking around that?
So first of all, let me just address the demographic. I already mentioned earlier on that the Census Bureau did that count during 2020 when there was a pandemic, and obviously we have evidence, and our research department has sort of actually very systematically demonstrated how that undercounted our population. So happy to share that and actually have our head of research come down and actually talk through and answer any questions related to the projected or the trajectory of growth and change in our neighborhoods. That's number one. Number two, I think that it's very clear that from this administration's policy that we recognize that one of the most important things is for us to build a more diverse distribution of residential product types. There's no question that if left alone, without intervention of our inclusionary development policy, linkage policies, that the developers in the market will only build the product that actually has a market for, and that our policies have been consistently to actually make sure that we deliver as much moderate and low-income housing and workforce housing.
Thank you, Chief. It's just because I want to get one more question in, please. Sorry, and I get anxious when I'm trying to get my questions in here. And you can confirm or deny or say this is not within the constructs of this conversation, but I guess some folks are interested in understanding the status of Chain Fork in Charlestown. I guess it was designated in 2015 and extended. I believe that they owed about $2 million in fees, and I'm just curious if they were collected, and why was there a 10-year designation allowed? What is your policy for conflict of interest, again, in this place? And I just would have to say, while I have the mic, that I really do appreciate the chair's question around some of the financials, and I think that it would be a good practice for us to be as laser focused on the data. I know you said that you may not have it, but I think it's a good practice for us to have every single cent, knowing the earmarks and where it came from and all that. So I would encourage us to do that. But go ahead, and if you have any insight regarding the Charlestown situation, I would appreciate
I
it.
think, Devin,
happy to.
you may know that.
So I believe the Chain Forge is a historic property in the Navy Yard that is in poor condition, but is an important historic monument. And the vision is to reestablish it as a accessible space where tourists, the Navy Yard can visit and Bostonians can visit, and then also have productive use. In 2015, I believe it was designated developer to build a hotel concept there. In order to access historic tax credits, a lease was signed in 2017 and then amended several times. I think we all know what happened in 2020 with the hotel market. The hotel market collapsed. We then instituted a payment program to keep the developer on the hook for moving the project forward. By the end of last year, we realized or actually middle of last year, we realized that this developer really did not have the ability to move it forward into construction. We thought the most fruitful thing to do would be to terminate the lease and find a new developer through a community-oriented process. So we engaged in that process, and we'll be putting out a new RFP to do just that. So it's a hard property to develop. It will be very expensive, but we're working toward getting that resolved.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you to the administration team that's here. Just want to highlight the lab proposal, the proposal lab to office residential. I wanted to acknowledge ADCO is really the group that was pushing this for a long period of time, going from office to residential. So do want to acknowledge ADCO. They've been talking about this issue for a period of time. Devin, I still believe, though, that the website is difficult for people to utilize, including elderly people. It's hard. It's hard to look for something if you don't know where it's located. So I just want to highlight that. I think there's more work we need to do on the website.
Happy to work with you, Councilor, on any good idea. We're welcome to discuss.
Thank you. One issue I wanted to highlight, abatements. Are we keeping track of companies coming in seeking abatements, seeking assistance from the city, from the BRA, BPDA on difficulty paying taxes?
No, I think that would be a question for the assessor in terms of, do we have conversations about that? Yes. That tracking of it is done at the assessing department.
Are they tracking? It will have a major impact on the city of Boston. I've asked the assessor this, but are we tracking who is asking for an abatement and how much is that already factoring in our budget and and the future economy of Boston?
I think the CFO's office is probably the best team to answer this question, but in terms of what I know, for a formal process, there is a formal process by which a property owner can ask for an abatement. I'm sure they have great data that they can present on that. So I think you're also kind of asking informally to what degree are new developments or others?
Yeah, mostly for development purposes. I think that's probably up to $1 billion. People seeking abatements. But what impact does that have on the city, on its finances, on its budget?
Yeah, and I think, again, I want to defer questions of revenue to the CFO, but obviously new development is critical to Boston's future because of Proposition 2.5 and the way that the city's revenues are constrained. We can only, costs, the tax basis can only go up 2.5% a year. Costs often rise faster than that, and new development is what helps the city ensure it has a balanced budget over time.
Thank you. One issue I'm also concerned with, and I think my colleagues might disagree with me, but, and I respect their position, but the percent of affordable housing that is kind of built into major projects, I think it's time to revisit that percent, especially during challenging economic times, maybe for a period of 5 years. Not sure what the percentage would be, but to move things forward, to move the economy forward, I think we should have a serious discussion about reducing that percent for a number of years, 5 years, so then housing can be built, development can be built, but also a lower percent of affordable housing can be built because it's not really being built now with the high percent. Just my opinion, but, and I know people will disagree, but is that something the BPDA will consider?
I think I want to first acknowledge that a number of developers have come to see us about how a different application of the current adopted official inclusionary zoning requirement and some relief from that would potentially make their projects more viable. I mentioned earlier on that our senior staff are always looking at different ideas that might actually address some of the sort of market challenges that the development community is facing. I think what your suggestion is a policy level discussion that we are engaging with the mayor's office and all the cabinets.
So, Chief, is that more of a project-by-project discussion, or is it citywide, or is it something you support? Is it something the mayor supports? Give us a little bit of background information on that, Chief.
I think that when I arrived last year in October, and one of the discussions the mayor, or one of the charges that she set for me was that she wanted to see what it is that we can do to make sure that projects that have been approved that are right on the 1 yard line, whether there are additional things that we as a city can do in order to allow that project to move forward. And as I mentioned to you, there are a number of these project proponents have suggested that if there was a relief from the approved required inclusionary development requirement, that it could make a difference. So what
Is
I would say...
Is that something you support, Chief?
So I would just say that the charge that the mayor gave to me was to make sure that when a developer, a proponent comes forward with a suggestion on what kind of relief they need, that's a discussion that she wants to engage in. So far, I would say that we have not had any specific requests, and if there was, or if there will be, it is my job to make sure that this administration considers it. So one thing we have learned is that there is no blanket programmatic change as to the inclusionary development requirement that we are considering at this stage, because, as the mayor has said, that there was already a close to 18-month sort of period leading up to it. And many projects, my understanding, the current capital market constraints and high cost of construction, a change in the inclusionary development sort of approval will not make the difference between whether the project can move forward or not in this current economic condition.
So just to summarize, if that did take place, it would be case-by-case basis, not necessarily a significant policy change, but a case-by-case basis to ensure a project moves forward if they need that support. But you would support that, the mayor would support that based on if that project needed that support to go forward. Is that accurate?
Let me just say this, which is that the one difference between that I did not characterize between the BPDA and today's planning department is that the inclusionary development requirement is no longer a decision that the BPDA makes alone without consulting the administration directly, as well as our colleagues at the Mayor's Office of Housing. So to the extent that these are not decisions isolated from our colleagues who have expertise and knowledge, I think that's a big difference. To your point, I think I would just emphasize that at this point, I do not believe that the administration, or I would say that the administration is not considering a blanket relief or reconsideration of the inclusionary development requirement that is in place right now.
More case by case.
Yes, but as I said, the criteria is based on what the specific hurdles of a particular project is, where it's located, who are the beneficiaries, which community and physical location, all of those things will come into play.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And I feel like it's important for me as chair just to say this, and also the representative of East Boston. Neighborhoods like East Boston remember what life was like under a 13% IDP policy. And it's a movie we've already seen before. Guess what? The affordability did not trickle down. My neighbors and elementary school cohorts that have now been displaced could not afford those luxury units, and they were ultimately displaced. And so I think the intentionality around building to the inclusion of folks with a higher affordability level is something I certainly want to see continue happening. And if there's any indication that the administration is going to move away from the 20%, then we need to have a larger conversation about it, because that would have huge ramifications for our city and people living here currently. And my last point that I want to make on this is that developers have already demonstrated that they can meet 20% affordability, which they've already done at 282 Bremen Street. And that project is completed. So I want to make sure that I say that and put that out there. Councilor Weber, you have the floor. Oh, Councilor Braden, I apologize.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I agree with regard to the IDP policy, and we have many projects that have been approved in Alston Brighton that were passed at a 13% IDP and they've never been built, so it wasn't a question of the IDP policy. It was a question of something else. And the luxury housing versus mixed income, I think we've put there was an incredible amount of luxury housing built that none of us could ever afford, and we didn't put enough focus into building mixed income housing at a range of affordability and get some more balance in our housing construction. So it's an ongoing battle to try and have our neighbourhoods be available and affordable for folks who grew up there and families who want to come and settle in Boston. So yeah, that's one we're going to fight if we have to. And also to your point, the issue about the census was really important. We are in Alston Brighton, our district. The undercount was about 6,000. Yeah. And we set about working with your department and the demographer there and the UMass Donoghue Institute to identify. So we were able to do the group quarters recounts and get it modified, but I still think we had an undercount of about 20,000 across the city, and that's a huge amount of money to be left on the table. So I'm hoping as we prepare for the next census that we will actually invest in having the supports that we need. It was COVID, it was a very difficult time to do a census, but I also know that we underinvested in actually the personnel. I think we allotted like $100,000 to support the census. And I know that Springfield did something like $2 million to help count their population. So I know Councillor Coletta Zapata has an intimate knowledge of how little they paid to count the census. Yes, those are really important things that we can't shortchange ourselves, like a penny wise and pound foolish almost. Also to the point of I'm so glad that you mentioned mitigation versus public benefits, community benefits, because it's very, very confusing for people and they often get the two things mixed up. Yeah. And I think our investment in transit is really, really important. Like, we're adding a huge amount of residential housing in Alston, Brighton, and in an area where a lot of young people, a lot of residents don't actually own cars. We're transit. We have a good transit system, but we have a transit system that needs huge investment, ongoing investment, probably for the next 20 to 30 years to get the Green Line and all of it mixed up. But I think the issue around investment in bicycle infrastructure, it has to be prepared. You know, we have to look at maybe land taking or creating setbacks, like on Western Ave, to make space to build a better bike infrastructure. You know, Western Ave is 42 feet wide. It's not a wide corridor. But then the other part of it was that, you know, in recently approved projects in Alston Brighton, we had 14,000 parking spaces. That's insanity. So something's got to give, and I think, you know, the BPDA made a valiant effort under the leadership of Joe Blankenship to try and have more reasonable parking ratios for lab spaces, and because where are those cars coming from? They're not, you know, live, work, and play in your neighbourhood. If you can walk to your place of work or cycle to your place of work, you shouldn't be bringing your car. And the cars literally are coming in from the western suburbs and clogging up our streets and making life very difficult for our neighbours. So I think, you know, that's why inclusion, integrating our conversations with BPDA and housing and all of it, all the different departments, is so critical to this conversation. It's not just one issue, it's how they all sort of blend together. So I appreciate all the great, you know, intention to go forward with this. Question, do I have a question? I think, you know, part of the BPDA's mission and the BRA's was, you know, economic development as well, and thinking about how hostile the environment is for science and biomedical research at the moment. We are going to lose, people are going to be poached and hired and headhunted to go elsewhere. I know that there's a delegation coming from Belfast, from Queen's University, to showcase their cancer research, and I'm sure they're going to be going back home with resumes. That's a good thing that they're doing so well, but how are we working with the state to ensure that we don't have a brain drain from Boston, given the present political climate?
Thank you, Councillor, for your comments and acknowledgement of the efforts and policies, integrating our policies in the planning department. On your question, you should know that the Shagun Idowu, our head of economic development and now in opportunity inclusion, is working with us, collectively, to try to make sure that we pay attention to the companies that are already here. The planning department's focus is primarily on the facilities, real estate, and sort of physical impact that these companies and businesses have on our communities. But of course, with Shagun's leadership, the broader issue about sort of job retention, business retention, as well as competing for new businesses and companies in this area, is a critical work that we as an administration engage in. I think that, you know, the news that Roche Pharmaceutical have chosen to move into your neighborhood in the new Enterprise Research Campus is a good news. Today, of course, you saw at the Globe, the Biogen is building a brand new headquarters that will actually consolidate their facilities in Kendall Square. And I think that, the kind of anecdotes that we're getting from certainly the leaders in the biomedical and pharmaceutical industries is that Boston continues to be a unique ecosystem for that industry. Now, I think with regards to larger policies at the federal level that might impact our competitiveness, this is something that we're paying attention to. I was this morning at a cabinet meeting, and you should know that that's top of mind. That is, what are the impacts of policies, federal policies? How is it impacting the competitiveness of us as a destination for new jobs in industries that are continuing to grow is something that we're paying attention to. So I don't know that, we're certainly not resting on our laurels. And to the point of the quality of life, affordability, and general public safety, and all of these things that the administration can impact are obviously they all factor into business decision making. So we're mindful of that. We're proud to be part of that decision making body now as part of the city with our colleagues in other departments.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Weber?
Thank you, Chair. I guess, so what is the update on the Article 80 redesign? What's the timeline and what's going on?
So we have moved from, so you know that the initial recommendations after a year and a half of work was published when I started in October. We had a comment period that ended at the end of the calendar year of 2024. And since then, we have been convening the steering committee, and that we have actually just moved on to the next phase, which we call specific actions that we're going to take. So there are three areas, three categories of changes that we're going to make. The number one is realigning and changing some of the engagement requirements that we have for project proponents. Part of that, and let me just finish the three categories. The first one is engagement, so what we call more effective engagement. The second part relates to a more predictable and transparent management of the process. And then finally, the third thing, which may be the most one that we'll see the most greatest impact from, is much better coordinated review with our fellow departments in the city to make sure that we're curating the review process to ensure that there's no duplication of review. And that is following the principle where we say, instead of asking how the proponents can engage in our process better, that we are actually asking ourselves how we within the city can organize out better to make sure that we can process projects in the Article 80 procedures much more effectively and in a much more timely manner.
Yeah, thank you. It just in terms of the timeline, like when we.
So we have been meeting with the constituents, the stakeholders, and the users of our process to show, and actually we're adopting what we call the pilot portion of these recommendations. So you hopefully by April, we are starting to actually adopt some of these new internally coordinated procedures.
Okay, will we have, I don't know, maybe the chair knows this, but will there be a modification of Article 80?
Yes, so included in that first phase are some actual legal cleanups that we will need to do, and that will require our board, the BPDA board approval, and subsequent changes that we will have to get the zoning commission's approval for. So when there is new draft changes to Article 80, legal changes, and Article 28, which is the article governing the Boston Civic Design Commission, which are changes that we would like to implement, we will certainly make sure that this body is notified. And there will be public hearings held at the BPDA before it goes to the zoning commission.
And the timeline for those changes?
So we think that by probably late April, we will have text for some of these changes. And some of this is really cleanup in the legal language to make sure that the new operating procedures that we're using is not in direct conflict with the ordinance that's the legal ordinance and document.
Okay. Thank you for that. So one of the, I guess, Excel sheets we got was, on community benefit disbursements. And I think this was asked earlier, but just so I understand, if we look at this, we can see money that came in or that was dispersed, I guess, that I'm assuming we got from the developer. Can we look at this and find out where projects that were supposed to be getting community benefits but not receiving them, would it show up here or would it show up somewhere else?
So it wouldn't show up on this list. We do track that internally through Salesforce, but it is not something that's readily publicly available, but it is something we track through our internal system, which is
Okay.
Salesforce.
Maybe a 17F or something. I mean, I feel like, it's the flip side of the coin. Like, great, we know it's coming in. We want to know what's supposed to be coming in that is not, so we can step up.
So just a point of information, as I think we all know, development has been rather slow in the last couple of years, which definitely has slowed down the community benefits and mitigation that's coming in currently.
Okay.
Because it's usually triggered by a building permit or a certificate of occupancy.
Sure. Okay. And in terms of, I guess, in terms of the transfer and staff and, I don't know if somebody else asked this, but did the planning department lose any staff as a result of the transfer? I mean, maybe people left, but somebody said, okay, I don't like this pension. I don't, the health insurance costs are going up, or I don't want to work under the city government and I'm leaving.
Yeah, like any large-scale transition, there are people who chose to not make the transition. There was lots of changes over the past 2 years. I think that's sort of to be anticipated when you go through this degree of change, and there's lots of different reasons for it. The good news is that we've grown the staff significantly over the course of the past 3 years. We had about 180 employees on staff. We had a tremendous vacancy at the beginning of the Wu administration, and now we have over 220 employees on staff.
Okay, and then in terms of the pension benefits, what you're offering people, do they have 401ks or something beforehand? So
Yes.
basically they can use that to purchase years of service. So, if they work for...
So they can't do that.
Oh, they can't, okay.
But the state law change that we asked for the home rule petition would enable them to do that.
But they would be able to use money that's in a qualified account to purchase the
without any changes.
No, we would need the home rule petition
Okay.
to pass, but they could use the money that they've saved in their retirement account
Yeah,
to purchase the time.
You can only purchase years of service for working for a government entity, so that if you moved here from California, right, you could take your money out of California's pensions program and put it into Massachusetts. The problem is that the EDIC is not considered a government employer in the eyes of the state pension program.
Okay, and I guess I just one last question in terms of a lot of the issues we're talking about. There's some recent news. The Boston Celtics have been purchased, or they're going to be purchased, and there's talk about the new owners building a new arena. I mean, has there been any discussion, or in terms of displacement, or what we're going to do? Is the planning department going to be involved in that?
I would say that it's appropriate for the planning department to be involved in any discussion and planning for another sports facility in the city. That's part of our responsibility.
Okay, and I just have any discussions taken place about that? Okay, yeah, I mean, I don't think the purchase needs to be approved, so it would be very early, and I think the rumors are a few years down the road, but anyway, okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Weber. I think I'll go a step further and just add to what you just said, Chief Shen, where the planning department should be involved in any discussion of a sports facility in or around Boston because of the Everett Stadium. So just putting that
Yes.
out there again. I have a question about that, but I'll save that for the end because that's tangential to all of this. But appreciate your work on that. I didn't know that, Councilor Weber, so let's keep an eye on that. I'm interested. I want to go back to the Article 80 reform process. Thank you for being a little bit more explicit, thanks to my colleagues' questions about April and the timeline. I had taken down notes about what the takeaways were: effective engagement, predictable and transparent management of the process, and then better coordination with departments. The community engagement part of it, is there going to be anything that you can point to that addresses the overrepresentation of certain homogenous groups in the city and their ability to provide feedback into development projects? And have you looked at I think it's the Arlington model, where you have to meet certain quotas per demographic groups, whether that be renters, homeowners, car owners, pedestrians, bikers, ethnicity groups, all of that? Like, can you just walk me through that and if there's any updates?
So thank you. Actually, one of the most important things is to think about how the engagement process, it can be more representative. And there's no question that in the staff's sort of tracking of who today participates, or in the past before we became planning department, and recognizing that there are certain demographic groups that are certainly well represented, and we don't actually fully know how much over-representation there is, because we don't actually understand fully in some neighborhoods what the representation means. So there's a lot of work that's going on there. I think that the details probably is better when we bring our team that has been thinking about the kinds of engagement methods. So we've already talked about sort of the notion of trying to figure out the media that we use, whether there are kinds of surveys that we could conduct at the beginning, and who conducts the surveys. Devin already mentioned the language access issue and barrier that we're directly addressing. This question, I think Councillor Mahia asked, like, can we have more staff actually doing legwork related to projects rather than to expect the people who want to participate to come to us? So there's a lot of work being done in that area, and there's also the implication on whether we have the resources to do that. Just to highlight one of the reasons why we're not, even though we're very confident of the changes that are being recommended, the reason why we're not going full speed ahead and adopting them is actually because there's resource implications. In order to get better engagement requires more resources, human resources, as well as other kinds of, in some cases, technological resources and investment that's necessary. So we're going to test it and see, with a few initial pilot projects at different scale, like a large project versus a small project, and perhaps in neighborhoods with different characteristics that we, through anecdote and our experience, we recognize sort of these differences in how different communities, such as yours, is different from Alston Brighton and Jamaica Plain. They all have their unique sort of characteristics and actual traditions associated with how these communities come together. So we plan to do more work. We also have, in addition to the actual engagement stuff, we're trying to be much more mindful of how we measure whether something is working or not. So that's another additional sort of like self-diagnosis and reflection on our work, which is something that I think, again, requires some cultural change on our part. So we know that's a challenge. We would appreciate feedback from councillors and the feedback that you get from the community. what we would like to do is, in order to actually be more transparent, when we identify these so-called pilot projects that we're moving and adopting and implementing these changes, we'll be sure to share that with all of you so that you can help us track them, because I know the proponents and the community involved will be giving you and the various councillors feedback.
Yep, and that was something, and just thank you, even going from, or thinking back to 2018 and where we were with Article 80 and just kind of doing an open call for participation and whatever we got, we got. I am grateful to hear that you're going to be testing it out. Please let us know so that we could provide that level of accountability and transparency, and the fact that you are cognizant of the fact that as a planning department, you have to be self-critical just to ensure that the things that you're implementing are working. So I appreciate that. The retirement payments, one thing that I'm less clear on, we had talked about going into potentially tapping the state budget to assist with payments that are not being made. Can you just clarify that? Like I'm trying to match it up with what you're saying now. I remember when we were having conversations, we were trying to figure out how we would make up the difference of folks in the EDIC that were not either paying into a system or whatever. We were going to go to the state budget. Can you just walk me through where we're at now with that?
If I'm recalling this correctly, I think what you're asking is, how do we get this piece of legislation passed quickly for our staff, because we have this home rule petition that's out there, and we need the Senate to take it up. That may not happen until the end of the legislative term, which is 2 years. Is there a mechanism by which we can do it more quickly?
Yes.
We have our outside counsel looking at this right now to determine if it would be possible to put legislation possibly into the state budget bill or something else that's going to pass in the near future. So we'd like to be back to talk to you about that as soon as we have the actual legal answer. And if that's the case, we would really like the council's support to get that done for our people.
Okay, and would that, and you might not have the answer to this now, but would that be as simple as adding in the EDIC as a recognized government agency? Is that?
It's basically 2 sentences that we need passed at the state level.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
We should probably do that anyway.
Yes, agree.
All right. Okay, I think that's it for me. We'll go back for another round. Council Mejia, if you have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I really do appreciate you all invoking my name throughout the process, even though I thought I was crazy at the beginning, but y'all going back to me, so y'all are affirming that I am not, that I'm onto something here. So I appreciate you all doing that. So I'm just curious in regards to some of the demographics data that have been posted for Fields Corner in regards to the squares and streets, but I didn't see any demographic information for Rosendale. Is there a reason for that discrepancy?
It's available, and I think we can certainly get it to you after this meeting. I've seen it.
It's on public for everybody?
Community members have brought it to our meetings too.
Okay, great. I'm happy to hear that. Thank you. Are you collecting demographics for all surveys and traditional events as opposed to just non-traditional tabling? So I'm just curious. I know that that's a good place for us to engage with folks, so I'm just curious about what that looks like.
I mean, wherever possible, we want that data. We don't want that data to be a hindrance to participation in the process, so it's sort of a balancing act around how much we can ask of people in the forum that they're participating in. But as a general rule, yes, we want that information.
And since Councillor Durkin was offering ideas, I might as well take the mic to do that. I've been a big proponent of tapping into our small local businesses, like our hair shop owners, our barber shops, the laundromats. Like, we can hold people hostage for 45 minutes while you're getting your hair blown out, okay? So that would be a really good place for you all to really spend some quality time asking folks their opinions around certain things. So I think I'm just going to share that with you all as a place where, if you're looking to gather data in a place where they can't run away from you, I would go to barbershops, hair salons, and laundromats, because there you have an undivided attention, and you might be able to ask all the questions that you are seeking during that 45-minute blowout. So I'm just curious around the anti-displacement proposal. Action plan calls for a review of the planning department's compliance with fair housing laws and city goals. and I believe we're intending to begin the review at the end of 2025. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if given the fact that, did you change that?
So we need to incorporate it into our FY26 budget, which means we would have that money in July. So not the end of 2025, the middle of 2025, the end of the 2025 fiscal year. So we're in the process of writing that
So that
RFP now.
when I say the end of 2025, I'm thinking like
year.
November, December, like.
Yeah, oh, sure, yes, that's accurate. We should have the report back by around
Right.
that time.
So to that point, I'm just curious if there is any appetite to hold off and wait until that review is completed before initiating any new zoning changes? Like, is there, explain why not?
I think it's important for us to continue the work of modernizing the zoning code while we do all the work of investigating our performance and improving everything we do. Anything we find, we would want to adapt into our zoning policies, but that doesn't mean we should delay work while we do it. We should just continue to evolve as an organization and then learn from the audit and implement the results.
And do you, from an efficiency standpoint, do you think there'll be a lot of undoing? Is it easy fix? Is it something that you think like, oh my God, we're gonna have to go?
I don't want to presume the results of the audit. I think we want to do a really fair and thorough audit that is effective in helping us identify where we are really helping affirmatively further fair housing, which is a value that our staff hold, and then looking for where areas of weakness. So anywhere we find a weakness, we want to address it.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'm just curious if, we talk about abolishing the BPDA, and that sounds like, whoa, but we didn't really abolish it. What we've done is have embraced it, right? It feels like, because when I think about abolishing, it just sounds so like traumatic, but it just feels like all we've done is adopted right? We haven't abolished it, we have adopted it. Does that sound like a more accurate situation?
So I think Devin answered the question really well, that there is a home rule petition that remains unfinished and unadopted that would allow the actual real abolishment of the agency that was formerly known as or is known as the Boston Planning and Development Agency. To the extent that we recognize that turning the page and actually recognizing as a planning department that we are different than that entity is something that we're embracing. And to the extent that until that home rule is passed and that the powers that are still necessary to advance our city, to address the most pressing issues, both planning, economic development issues, and that the only way that we can make sure that those powers are not sort of, that we keep those powers for the good of the city is something that we embrace. So I think that we recognize the need for a transformation that is not just let's say, exercise in performance, but actually change in culture, and change in attitude, and change in outlook and mission.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that what I have found in my time here in this chamber and just working in community is that, and I say this, and I know this is not something that, it always causes a little bit of chaos when I say it, but people don't trust us. They don't trust government. And even though I'm a politician, I find myself to be more of I feel like I'm more of a public servant in the way that I show up in this world. And what I've been really struggling with and really trying to figure out how we grapple with this moment, because not just here in this particular chamber, but just across the country, there is a disconnect. They don't trust us. And sometimes with good reason, right? Because things have always been done to us. And I think that it is really difficult to show up here and then ask difficult questions, because that's what my job is as a city councilor. My job is to be the checks and balances to the administration, regardless of who it is in power, right? And I think that there's this narrative that it's us versus them at all times, right? And it gets exhausting to always be in constant fight mode when it comes to people just want to stay in the city that they have built families and homes here. And so I just want to acknowledge that a lot of this is because those folks who have lived here for a long time or have decided to make Boston their home want to stay here. And we want to feel like we belong. That's the tagline for the city. We all belong, like we belong, right? So we want to feel like we belong. And I'm just curious, as we continue to have these conversations, what does that look like? God bless you. What does that look like to you all, especially when people don't believe us? Like, what can we do in this moment to turn things around? Because I think about White Stadium, I think about all of these decisions that are being made without us, it feels like. And so can we just have a restorative justice moment here and talk to us how we're going to turn things around?
I would say that I think throughout this hearing, I hope that what you're seeing is a willingness for us to first listen and also engage on the legitimate questions that you and other councillors are raising with us. I don't know that there's a shortcut to earning your trust. I recognize that every day I go to work and I see our staff, they bring a kind of enthusiasm and commitment that I just, for me, I really see our charge as taking that and harnessing that in working with folks. I know that sometimes when decisions are being made, it feels like that is not directly connected to the kinds of conversations that we have. And I recognize it's our responsibility, our staff's responsibility, to help explain and make those connections. I think oftentimes that there's also a lack of clarity in communicating how decisions are being made, because from listening, there needs to be action and choices made. And recognizing earlier on where there is different choices have different consequences or impact, recognizing that and actually acknowledging that is an important part of what builds trust, even as we don't always agree. So I think there's a lot more work to be done. I think hopefully today at the end of this hearing that you'll get a sense that there's a real commitment on our part to do that, and that it's not just commitment, but it's actual sort of real change. So I expect that you will be asking us to come back to talk to you in this committee and other committees to make sure that you're holding our feet to the fire. And I embrace that challenge. I think that you're seeing the leadership here. We recognize that it has to come from a commitment at the leadership level, and then the staff can actually, channel all of the good intentions that we have and operationalize it. And I appreciate you asking the questions, and I appreciate the feedback that you will give to us, because without that feedback, we can't further change. Will we sometimes fall short? I believe that that's just the nature of doing work, right? That there's going to be challenges with resources. I've already recognized that in order to engage your community to the level that I think you would like, right now requires a level of resources I don't think that we have. But can we bring that, and how can we be more effective in using the resources that we have? That's something that I hope that we can do.
Chair, thank you. Chair, could I just have
Yep.
just one more follow-up question? And I do appreciate the willingness, and I do appreciate having the opportunity to ask questions and be in community with you. I think that the budget is really tight right now. We can't be asking you all to do like 500 things when we don't got the money to do it, and I understand that. However, we're talking about planning and development, and we're talking about people who stand to benefit from construction, and that there has to be someone who can foot the bill for a real meaningful engagement, whether it's us or figure out how we get that money. But we can't shortchange community engagement, because that is, if we're looking to rebuild trust, we're going to have to make those investments. And I think that there is an opportunity for us to figure out what that looks like, whether it's like everybody, Councilor Durkin had lots of great ideas, development. I think we should create two funds, a fund for for every project that we develop, there should be some dollars that are earmarked for a meaningful community engagement fund that the developers are paying for. I don't know if that exists already, if maybe, I don't know, but if it doesn't, you all can ask them to pay for it. And then the other thing too is that with our Boston Public Schools, and I know that they have their own separate process, but I know that the city has been dabbling in it now. They've been merging, everything's changing. But I do believe that, with our school facilities, I went to every single Boston public school you could imagine. We bounced around from place to place. The conditions of our schools are just in a really bad state. And I'm just gonna throw it out there as something for us to consider is, all these folks who are making a profit out of our city, there should be some dollars earmarked to creating a fund for BPS, like to build BPS. And I don't know if that exists, Devin, but there should be a fund that for every single project that gets built here in the city of Boston, a portion of that, because I know we have the Neighborhoods Jobs Trust, we have, the Housing Trust, and there should be an Education Facilities Trust. Write those down. I'm going to give credit for this one. Because, I put it on the record. But no, there should be something. I just feel like, Mattapan doesn't even have a high school, right? I'm just thinking of like real intentionality around how we help support our Boston Public Schools. And they're building dreams and hopes and aspirations. So I just want to put that on the record as something worth considering as we continue to hold folks accountable and to task. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Mejia. I'm going to switch to public testimony. I appreciate the folks that have been patient here in the chambers. We'll go to them first and then go to those online. First up is Caligula. Caligula is a Roman Empire. Roman Emperor. I apologize. You can go up. Please state your name and your organization. You have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing this testimony. Lori Rowden from the Rosendale Coalition. A civil rights movement's centerstone achievement was the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and the act was followed by affirmatively forwarding fair housing, AFFH mandate, and a rule to strengthen anti-discrimination in housing. Mayor Wu issued an AFFH executive order following that, assuring the engagement of protected classes in proportion to their presence in the community is central to upholding civil rights. Proportional engagement is not measured by event types or number of events held, no matter how enthusiastically conducted. Proportional engagement of protected classes can only be meaningfully measured by numbers, a count, that assure that engagement has included the diverse community. The Planning Department's Squares and Streets rezoning in Rosendale has not met this standard. Specifically, white residents comprise more than 80% of participation in a community where whites are less than 50%, and these counts are based on demographics that were publicly posted as of May 2024. But since that time, the Planning Department stopped publicly displaying participant demographics, or in some cases did not collect them. There's no housing crisis so severe as to advance decisions informed by an overwhelmingly white group in a community as diverse as Rosendale. No crisis should discount the central tenets of the Fair Housing Act, or AFFH. We are asking the Planning Department to not submit the current zoning code draft to the approving bodies until you've regrouped and established a meaningful engagement of protected classes. And to Councilor Mejia's point, when you do your audit, I think you're going to find that there was not proportional engagement and the AFFH was not considered effectively. In early February, we submitted a 4-page document regarding AFFH. It included meaningful goals to be reached, include the data that you've been talking about. It included some of the aspirations that this department has testified to today, and we've not yet received a written response to that document. Also, close to 200 residents have signed a petition asking the City Council to exercise its oversight responsibilities by holding a hearing examining equity in the Planning Department's execution of Squares and Streets. Thank you for allowing this testimony.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have, I have Laurel Radwin. Lori? Oh, okay. Thank you, Lori. If you'd like to go. I'm the last one? No, there's more. Yeah, they were here before me. Okay, all right, don't worry. All right, we'll do Karen. All right, no worries. Karen?
Hi, thanks so much. I'm from Roslindale. I'm a self-employed small businesswoman, and my business has been in Roslindale since 2008. I live and work in Roslindale and moved my business to Roslindale in 2008 when the building I was in JP for 10 years as an office owner got sold. I've thought about addressing today my comments based on what I was hearing. And I specifically want to talk about the Anti-Displacement Action Plan. I've been engaged in my community for all my years there, and I've attended the in-person and the virtual meetings that have gone on about squares and streets. And in my civic activist life, I work with housing justice. As a business owner and a pretty plugged-in person, I have not only brought up in our meetings that we've had about squares and streets and planning and rezoning anti-displacement, but I've been pretty consistent about expressing that. And I think each time the anti-displacement theme was brought up, both for businesses and residents, it was dismissed. It was like, we're working on that, there's a plan that's going to come out. But when you're in the eye of the storm and development is coming, as it will in this, right next door to my office, like 3 feet away, we need a plan now. We need to be engaged with giving feedback on that plan, and it needs to be concurrent with any rezoning strategies that are being thought of by the city. Like, we have not been included. So this is the first time today I've heard that there's actually an anti-displacement plan being published shortly, but I'm interested to know what it includes. And then today I hear that that you have ideas about tracking and assessment, and that one of those is to track like which tenants in which buildings that are going to get redeveloped have to get moved out, and inviting them back in or helping find another placement. But I think a missed piece is the interim, like where are those people going in the interim? And I'll have an interim of multiple years. I've been in this office for 18 years. I put a person who is a tiny little business person who doesn't have much money, I put over $10,000 into the space, and now I'll be displaced. So, I'm not speaking just for myself, but that so many others, small business people who are the hearts of Main Streets, face this, and as do residents in our community. And we really need this attended to in a way that we're participating in the planning of. So I think, and lastly, I think with regard to, coming here, I don't have a car, so coming here on the T, I always hear, please give priority seating to seniors and people with disabilities. So, I am a senior, and I think about my office. It's like one of the only offices in the area that is ADA compliant. And when I have looked, which I have done during the pandemic, because it was hard to keep an office open then, so I kept looking for smaller offices. When I look for offices, there's hardly anything out there that's ADA compliant. And my clients can come and park in the tiny little parking lot we have, and come with canes, and come with rollators, and come with wheelchairs, and come into an ADA compliant office. So as you're thinking about interim plans with business owners to relocate or rehome, I like to think rehome them, I think priority should be given to those who need the ADA compliance and who are losing ADA compliant spaces. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Next up, we have Elliot Laffer, and then Victor Brogna, and then Felicia.
Hello, I'm Elliot Laffer from Back Bay, and I must be getting old because I remember when Kairos came and he was young. And that means that he's old and I'm ancient. But a couple of things that I do maybe want to add from hopefully some wisdom that I've gotten over these years. One is that planning and development don't belong in the same boat. And a big part of the problem is that planning is long-term and development is short-term, and in the crunch, the short-term almost always tends to overwhelm the long-term because somebody says, give us a result. The result is a building or something that happens today, and if the plan gets in the way, well, we're merged together and we'll get it out. If you're separate, at least the planning person can say, wait a minute, that doesn't agree with the plan. And we've certainly ignored anything that vaguely resembles a plan for as long as I've been here. That's why we go to the Board of Appeals all the time. So I think that that's really, really important to think about. Second thing to think about, you talked about process and trying to streamline process, and I think that's very important. But as one who has done probably as many of these big development processes as anybody in the city, I can tell you that the place where the delays happened was never in the process because we couldn't delay things. It was always in the agency because the agency could say, extend that date 6 weeks, because you guys could do it. And the first process that I did was Copley Place to show how far back I go. And the BRA person who was involved there was called the late, I'll not say his name, because he was always late for everything in the process, and that was a state-run process. But the BRA was the delayer. So that's a place to think about. The third thing, you've talked about a home rule petition that's most of the way through the legislature. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I think it's nowhere through the legislature because it has to start again, because what passed last time isn't passed anymore. Maybe it even has to pass the city council again, don't know. But I know it doesn't, that it passed the state house before doesn't matter. There was a lot in that bill that I think was very troublesome. And it needs, I think, a lot more work, and I would hope that there would be an opportunity to talk more about it. There have been suggestions made about ways to improve it and concerns that are there, and I hope that there'll be the opportunity to make that better, so that when we come out at the end of this, we will have a better process with a better agency, with really good people who've worked really hard to make the city a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot. Victor, North End resident.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Victor Baranya. I'm chair of the Zoning, Licensing, and Construction Committee of the North End Waterfront Residents Association, although today my comments are personal. I start with welcome back, Chief Chen, and I am delighted to note your return when you say that planning should not be market-driven, because that, of course, is one of the problems, the issues that I and my colleagues have had over the years. We've always felt that the planning, the development review section twisted the arms of the planning department. And now it is a section in the planning department, and so we hope that the twist goes in the other direction. Also, I want to welcome you to the North End Waterfront on April 1st, when you will be coming, and I can ask some other questions. But there is one thing I want to say before then, which I testified to before the council last year, but it's so important to me that I want to mention it again. And that is because you weren't here then. And that is the provision, the kernel provision of the Bronin report that was published in January of 2023, which says that neighborhood-specific zoning should be reversed. On page 22, sorry, I need glasses. My first recommendation is not a but the key to a better code, that is the zoning code. Boston must reject neighborhood-specific zoning. I cannot emphasize more strongly that that should be rejected. Everyone that I've spoken to, every time it has come up, the conversation is Boston is a neighborhood city. We are proud of our neighborhoods. We love our neighborhoods. We want to preserve our neighborhoods as neighborhoods. And as I testified last year, it's not exclusionary because the perimeters of the neighborhoods may change, but the faces may not change, but the faces change. There are neighborhoods where Haitian Creole is spoken now. There are neighborhoods, multiple neighborhoods where Spanish is spoken. There are neighborhoods where Portuguese is spoken. So I don't know why that is a purpose that should be imposed on Boston. It doesn't belong here. Nobody wants it here. And I hope that can be rejected. Anything else that I have to say, I'll say on April 1st. Welcome.
Thank you, Victor. I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name. You can just come up and say it again. Kaliga or Kalija? Kaliga, I apologize.
Hi, it's okay. Hi, Counselor. Hi, everybody. First of all, I just wanted to say I can walk to Rossi Square from my home in JP, and I have family that lives in Rosendale, very close to me. You guys said that you listened to the people in Fields Corner about squares and streets, and you're in the process of making changes, right? Are you going to listen to every neighborhood about squares and streets? Because I have my boots on the ground, and I will tell you who I am in a minute. I'm also a member of the JP Neighborhood Council, but I also hold other hats. And I can tell you, I have friends and colleagues across Boston, and I don't know anybody who is excited. In fact, most people are quite dismayed, and some are terrified of the Squares and Streets plan. And the reason is, it seems to be that it's going to give more power to developers. And I'm in my 70th year. I was born in Boston. I've been through BRA. I've been through homes being taken by eminent domain in this city. I have been an activist since before I was in double digits, truly. And I can say that throughout my lifetime, the developers hold most of the sway, no matter what you call your agency or who's there. It was good to hear you people speak about community engagement, but always, this seems to be putting the Boston Planning Department, changing the name and putting it closer to the mayor, doesn't really seem to me that it's better for the people of Boston, but more for the developers still. I want to say that I'm also on the steering committee of the Stony Brook Neighborhood Association in JP. We have been inundated with development, all in the name of housing. And it's disingenuous to say that we have a housing crisis in Boston. What we have, most of the things being built are luxury and not truly what they call affordable is not affordable to people coming out of college with debt, and they're going to have more of it now with the people in DC, to people who are starting out as teachers. I'm a nurse of over 47 years. I was a Boston City nurse, okay? And I can tell you that when you get out of nursing school or you're a new cop or teacher, you can't afford to, yeah, there's going to be a brain drain. Say that 3 times, a brain drain, as Councilor Breeden said, because people can't afford to live in Boston with what they call affordable. So I say, why don't we repurpose some things? We have a lot of empty brick and mortar storefronts. We have a lot of luxury. I know Velo, which is right near Forest Hills where I live, has a lot of empties, and the Pierce building does, and the Millennium does. They're luxury. They have empty things. Repurpose things. Repurpose storefronts. Rezone them. We don't need to keep building, because building more and more developments is impinging on people's quality of life. So you have old families breaking up and moving to Randolph and Brockton because they can't afford here with the property taxes to live here. In my part, which is the funky part, not the posh part of JP, okay? Lee Goodman, who has the Doyle's contract, for instance, he has condos going for $3.25 million, which is going to bring up all our property taxes. I don't know if we can afford to live there. That's called market right now. We need to think about housing in a different way, because it's not a housing crisis, it's a greed crisis that created the housing crisis. And I'm glad that you're nodding at that, but if you really want to work with the community, then work with people like me, who are really engaged, or like Laurel, or like these people. And we're not all old people. I know everybody here's a senior. And I still work 7 days a week. I have a small business in JP. So I am saying we need to engage youth more too. Because I'm going to tell you something else. When there are MOU, which Lee Goodman has, MOU or MOA violations, with a lot of developments I've worked with through the years, I know that might be a zoning problem or an ISD problem, but why would we use those same developers? They don't even get a slap on the wrist. And they keep getting big contracts. Explain that. And I know what happened in your district in East Boston, what's going on, Councilor Coletta. It's all across. It's all across Boston. And we really you need to work closer with people like us and really hear us. And when
Thank
you
you.
talk
If you
about,
mind just
I'm
wrapping up your
almost done.
comments. Yep, we're past 4 minutes.
I'm almost
so,
done.
Yep,
I
if you
just
want
want
to
to
wrap it
say,
up. Thank you.
it's good that you want to engage people in their own language, but I'm going to tell you something. Many people who are good, hardworking people and pay their taxes are working more than one job, and they also have been disappointed by people who are in positions of power in Boston, whether they're appointed or elected, and they are tired. And for generations, they haven't been listened to. So that's it's a cultural divide, and getting language is not the only way to engage people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll go to Zoom if folks are still on. We have Pamela King, Jean Radwin, and Tom McDonald. Thank you so much, Pamela. If you can hear us.
Yes, okay, I can hear you now.
Excellent. All right, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, yes, I wanted to discuss or testify to the mention by the chief, the new chief of planning department, how the Fields Corner project was paused in order to improve the issues or improve understanding about the issues of displacement and community engagement. And I am wishing and asking that that same pausing should happen for the Rosendale squares and streets, especially in view of the fact that I signed 2 petitions, 200 signatures each, which is 400 people, asking for this pause to consider the displacement effect and the lack of community engagement, because so many people work long hours and 2 jobs in that community. They were not really present at the city-held events. So therefore, we asked again through a letter that they pause it the day that they were voting on it. And the letter that was written, the signatures that we have been totally ignored, and we're just asking, would it be possible? We have a grassroots neighborhood group that really is asking them to pause the evaluation or the continuing of the squares and streets in Rosendale to get a better input from the community, especially the people with limited English, and for the displacement issues. So I'm wondering why we are being ignored as people representing the community organizations in Boston, one of which I represent, the People's Academy, and we're trying to ask you to give Rosendale a consideration that you gave to Fields Corner in terms of reevaluating the displacement and the community engagement issues that were lacking in terms of evaluation at the present voting for the Rosendale squares and streets. So I think that those issues are very important citywide, and that's why we're coming together as neighborhoods to support one another. Rosendale, Charlestown, Dorchester, White Stadium, everything we need, we're getting the same problem. And this is what happened. They totally ignored the letter that was written, that I wrote. I never got a response. They never mentioned the letters that were written asking them to pause the decision. So right now we're asking them to consider and please pause this Rosendale Squares and Streets program from going forward, to give opportunity for more people to be engaged and to be informed, and for the city to look at the displacement issue. And so I think that that is very reasonable, and it's something that would apply to other neighborhoods across the city, and it could be an example. The work that Rosendale is doing can be an example of how to really engage the community of people, hardworking people who are not able to go to meetings. Rosendale's approach to evaluating the displacement issues, it would be a model for the other neighborhoods that are going through things similar to squares and streets. So I'm asking that we really look at that and consider that, and come together as a city around this issue, and specifically around supporting Rosendale's request for a pause on the Rosendale Squares and Streets for community engagement and better evaluation of displacement.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you so much. I apologize that time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
We do have Jean and Tom both on the call. Go ahead, Tom. You're on.
Hi, thanks for taking my testimony. I've written a letter to Chief Shen, and I wanted to read some of it to put into the public testimony record. I lived in Rosendale for 34 years. Most of these years, I've worked as an ESL teacher in the Dorchester Haitian American community. I'm deeply committed to the issues of equity and inclusion for Boston's immigrant community, and I applaud you, Madam Mayor, for your core principle that everyone who lives in Boston should be able to stay in Boston. I wanted to just document, as a longtime Rosendale resident, that there were some shortcomings in terms of representation. I was involved in an informal survey. We reached 104 Rosendale residents, 60 of whom were native Spanish speakers, and 90% of whom, as late as September, not citizens for plazas y calles. The food into at the Rosendale Church in October, again, no awareness. there are other, certainly language, but not only language-related shortcomings. What I testimony is if Boston is goal.
Tom, we're having difficulty hearing you. Can you hear us?
I hear you.
Okay, if you can speak more into the phone, and then you're also going in and out, I'll allow for another minute. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'm trying now.
Okay, it's still a little choppy, but feel free to go for another minute.
Okay. If Boston is intent on its stated goal to confront issues of equity, Squares and Streets presents an ideal setting for truly representative and involved community input. At the same time that the planners and advocates of the small area map in Roslindale emphasize the urgent need for housing, they minimize the impact of the proposed upzoning by predicting that new construction is not imminent but will occur gradually over time. This reasoning suggests there is no justification for immediate zoning legislative action. To the contrary, it affirms that awareness of representational community engagement ahead of legislative approval for new construction does not present an obstacle to addressing the housing crisis. In fairness, a diverse community of residents who currently make Roslindale their home must have voice in the development of their neighborhood. So I urge you to put off approval by the Zoning Commission. Other identified Squares and Streets districts in Boston are aware of the weaknesses in community engagement which Roslindale has experienced and are mobilizing their communities accordingly with the cooperation and collaboration of the planners. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone's collaboration and advocacy on this topic. I don't think that we have Jean on the line.
Yes, we do.
Oh, I apologize. Okay, you've been waiting so patiently. You'll be our last public testimony. Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to add to some of the commentary that's been evoked in terms of Roslindale, what I think applies to rezoning in Squares and Streets in any community that is as diverse ethnically, socioeconomically as Roslindale. One of the things that the Squares and Streets activities program has evoked are strong feelings by people in the community, strong and diverse feelings. Understandably, people's backgrounds are different, their heritages are, their needs, their economic status. So you have all these differences being evoked, and the process that the city has used in Squares and Streets has not afforded any effort to reconcile these feelings that have been evoked, to find ways to build consensus. Although consensus was talked a lot about at the initiation of the program, there really has not been any effort to build consensus, to get individuals who have strongly differing views to legitimize each other's perspectives. And so in the end, what I'm afraid we may end up with in Roslindale and in other communities in Squares and Streets is these wonderful rezoning plans, but a community that has become more divergent and more uncomfortable with its various elements. So I would urge the planning department not only to slow down some of its Squares and Streets activities because of the lack of involvement, but I think the nature of the involvement has been one that evokes feelings but does not provide a means to reconcile and build consensus. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think that we've neared the end of our hearing here. I want to thank the original co-sponsors. Thank Council Mejia for being here until the end. I think we have enough information where this can stay in committee, although if we wanted to have another hearing on it, that's also something that is a possibility. But I can say with that this hearing on docket 0337 is adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to the ministers for being here.
Thank you.